Well, ya got me. Taryn laughed, running her hands down his shoulders and coming to slide around his torso in a hug. I'm not sure just yet, Cliff's medley. But I might just love you. If she could hear the thundering of his heart, she didn't comment. But Cliff was pretty sure he was about to die of a heart attack. Hugging her back was easy enough, but managing to find the right words to say back was harder when she literally just fried his heart and soul. Twice. He swallowed hard, fighting the victorious grin worming its way onto his face. He kissed the top of her head chastely and said, I love you too, Taryn. PSD. Cliff looked over to see Eric's nod of approval from where he and Adriana were dancing. Her face was positively beaming and she grinned when their eyes met. Cliff fought the laughter clawing its way up his throat, even as the bride and groom left the dance floor and headed toward the cake. Let them have the cake. Normally he wouldn't pass up cake for anything, but right now he'd give all the cake in the world to stay right here with Taryn in his arms, happily on cloud 9. Gods, her feet hurt. If this party hadn't been such a fantastic occasion, she might have left a while ago. Most of the night Adriana walked and talked, danced and laughed without a trace of angst or discomfort. Everyone who'd come to their wedding had genuinely wanted to be there, and for that she was grateful. This day had been better than any wedding she ever could have dreamed of, and she'd spent it with all her loved ones, and she'd even made a few friends. But wow, her feet hurt. Eric started to take notice of her dragging feet after the cake had been cut and eaten. He leaned closer so she could hear him over the din. We can leave whenever you want, you know. If you're getting tired. She smiled up at him gratefully. Soon. Adriana took his hand and they strolled through the room once more, thanking people once again for coming. Eric, it seemed, hadn't been the only one to notice her exhaustion because more and more people approached them with well wishes and goodbyes. Adriana had barely had time to meet the Sullivans' daughter Genevieve before they left earlier. The curly-haired blonde had hugged her and thanked her profusely for the invitation, and insisted that as soon as Adriana had the baby they would have to meet again. The baby in question had thankfully not given her any problems either. She hadn't had a trace of sickness all day and the kicking had even been minimal. She liked to think that maybe he or she was taking the day off today with badgering her with endless pokes and prods. The idea made her smile. What are you smiling about? Eric asked. Oh, just the peanut. She said, rubbing her stomach absently. He's been good today. Eric beamed. He looked like he wanted to rest his palm on her stomach as well, but he shoved his hand in his pocket instead. She snorted, wondering if he would ever stop being so awkward. Just then, Finn emerged from the crowd, looking worn but masking it well. Hey. Adriana said, gesturing to his unbuttoned shirt front. Meet someone nice. Huh? Finn asked, looking down. Oh, it was hot earlier. Are you insinuating that I met someone who couldn't keep her hands to herself? Did you? Adriana grinned and Eric snickered. No, Finn said stiffly, looking awkward. I met someone very nice actually, but this was all my doing. Seriously, it was hot in here. Right. Adriana replied, shrugging her eyebrows. So what was her name? Hey guys. Cliff suddenly appeared, slinging his arms around Eric and Finn's shoulders. The redhead looked relieved at the interruption and slung his own arm around Cliff's. I've been looking all over for you. Why? Where's Taryn? Eric asked. She went back to her hut with her parents. They were ready to go to sleep. They usually have an early bedtime, you see, Cliff said, sighing dramatically. We should have weddings more often, guys. This was the best day ever. Well, the only one who's relatively close to getting married next is you, Cliffy. Finn smirked. They all laughed as his grey eyes widened to the size of saucers. Aha, not just yet, my friend. Cliff said, clearing his throat awkwardly. Not just yet. But you're off to a good start, Eric smirked. It's not every day you have your first K. And it's not every day I pass up cake either. I wonder if there's leftovers. Cliff stated in a loud voice. He pulled himself from the boy's grip and tramped over to where Ben the baker and his workers were cleaning up the remaining food. As awkward as a butterfly with mismatched wings. Adriana stated, watching their curly-haired friend go. She lifted a foot and rolled her ankle, hiding her wince at the tingling pains. Though she tried to be subtle, the action did not go unnoticed by her new husband. "We should go, it's getting late," Eric said. "Yeah, I'm about ready to collapse," she agreed, looking around for her parents. They were saying goodbye to the various guests from Braun. "Let's start walking." "Too late, we can't f. Don't even think about it, I'll carry you if I must, but we're not flying," Eric teased, turning toward the door. Adriana paused, realizing they'd just left her brother standing in the middle of the room. She turned and barely saw his uncomfortable look disappear. She reached up on tiptoes and gave him a hug. "You okay?" Yeah," he replied, perhaps a little gruffly. "Why wouldn't I be?" "You don't have to pretend with me, Finn," she said quietly. "I can tell when you're lonely." Finn stifled a laugh, releasing her. "I'm not lonely, Anna." "HMPH, okay," Adriana said. "Even if you don't want to admit it, I can see it's there." When he didn't reply, she cleared her throat. "Anyway, thank you for everything today. It means a lot to me." "Well, everything had to be perfect," Finn said simply. "My only sister's only wedding, it had to be." "Well, thanks," Adriana laughed, taking Eric's hand again. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Yeah, bye guys." Eric pulled her through the crowd, waving to people as they passed. "You know he'll be alright, right?" Adriana nodded. "I know. It's just everyone else has someone to talk to and he's been wandering the hall by himself all day." "He's not alone, he's just not dating." "Yes, but you can see it in his eyes the way he's looking at all the couples around." Adriana sighed. "It's been a long time since he's dated anyone. I just feel bad." "Well, don't feel too bad," Eric said, finally reaching the doorway. Her parents were talking to an old couple as they left. "He has plenty of options and he just turned Inga down. I think if he was that desperate, he'd be dating. Maybe he's just waiting for the right person." "Yeah, maybe." Eric kissed her temple. "Don't stress about it. He'll find someone when the time is right." "You're right," Adriana sighed, smiling when the elderly couple finally left and her parents were free. Hiccup and Astrid beamed, giving each of them a hug. "Leaving so soon?" Hiccup asked. "PFT, soon," Adriana demanded. "I don't even know what time it is, it's so late." "Trust me, it's late," Eric stated. Astrid pulled a few loose strands of hair out of her daughter's eyes. Of course Eric would know the time. "It's a habit, keeping time," Eric replied. "Well, whatever it is, it's time to go before I fall over," Adriana said, hugging both her parents as tightly as she could. "Thank you for everything." "Anything for you, Addie," Hiccup said, kissing her temple. Astrid pulled away and pointed at both of them. "Married or not, if either of you ever need anything, just ask. Just because you're married now doesn't mean we'll never speak again. I'll find you and make sure the house isn't in complete disarray." "Please don't," Adriana giggled when Eric's smile got stiffer. "We already got that spiel from Lara. Except you know I'll practice some self-restraint and not barge into your house." Astrid winked. "All right, be free, my children." And with that, she threw the doors open and practically shoved them outside. "So eager to be rid of us," Adriana managed to say through her laughter. "Are you kidding? I've been waiting a long time to have the house once again just for me and my husband. I'm finally one kid down," Astrid proclaimed. Hiccup's eyebrows shot upward into his hairline at this announcement. "Enjoy it while you can, your day of reckoning is coming. Sleep well, kids." And with a not-so-subtle wink, she slammed the door closed once more. Eric cleared his throat awkwardly, making Adriana burst into laughter. She pulled him down the gangplank to begin their walk to the place they'd be staying. Eric snickered, commenting on how Mama Astrid never ceased to surprise him. "I'm telling you, they'd better have a good lock on their door." "Cliff. I honest to all the gods hope that Cliff has more common sense than to burst into any married couple's bedroom," Eric said, rubbing his eyes. "Either way, I really don't want to think about it." "Same, but still, they have another thing coming if they think they're one kid down. Cliff is going to give them a run for their money." Eric laughed, kissing the back of her hand. They were quiet for a few minutes as they walked steadily down toward the ground. The night was clear with a few scattered clouds, the visible stars twinkling. The moon was a mere sliver in the sky, providing enough light for them to see. Adriana stepped closer to her new husband, her heart leaping happily. "This is our first walk as a married couple." Grinning, Eric wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I never thought that a little picture I drew for you would lead us here." "I know," she said, stepping on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek. "But I'm glad it did." "Me too." Finally, they reached the ground. They traveled the worn, newly cleaned path toward a domed building in the woods. Neither of them had seen the interior yet. Her parents had said something about it being a surprise for their first night together. Adriana's stomach leapt at the thought of this being their first night together as a married couple. Lit by various torches on the path, their shadows loomed massive against the domed building as they approached. They gradually shortened down to their actual sizes until Eric finally reached out to grab the handle. In that moment, Adriana's stomach exploded with nerves. This was their first night together. How would the rest of the night play out? Exhausted though she was, they hadn't really discussed how the rest of the night would go. They'd had an unspoken agreement to discuss it at some point, knowing the sensitivity of the topic and situation. Now she was realizing the conversation hadn't happened. Eric paused, causing her to look at him curiously. She was filled with a small amount of relief when she saw that he was just as nervous as she was. "You ready?" he asked. She squeezed his hand and nodded. They couldn't stand outside and deliberate forever. No matter what happened tonight, it didn't matter. Eric pulled the door open and stepped inside. Adriana followed him in, looking around with wide eyes. "Oh." He pulled the door closed, also gaping. The room was bathed in an orange glow from a furnace in the center. A rack of logs stood on one side of the room so they could throw more wood in the fire to keep them warm. A hole in the center of the ceiling kept the smoke from filling the room. The resulting warmth from the furnace was nice and toasty. Near the rack of logs was an area to make food and many pitchers of water should they need it. On the other side of the domed room was their bags and a bed covered by a pile of thick furs nearly a foot high. "Whoa." Adriana walked to the bed and picked one up. It was heavy and incredibly soft. She wrapped it around her body and sighed contentedly. "So comfy." Eric's dimpled smile made her heart leap. "You're such a dork." "Boy, this dress may be beautiful, but in all actuality it's quite itchy in all the wrong places," Adriana said simply. "I've been dying to take it off for hours." Eric gave a slight chuckle. He walked to the rack and threw a couple logs into the furnace. Sparks flew upward and disappeared. Within an instant the fire rose hungrily around the dry wood and the glow brightened the room. Eric unbuttoned his vest absent-mindedly while he stared at the fire, drawing her attention. With a sigh she sat on the bed and sank a good 3 inches into all the furs. "Oh my," she lay backward and sighed, flinging off her shoes. Eric snorted, but she couldn't care less about the shoes. "This is the squishiest bed I've ever been in." "Get over here." Eric walked over and pushed his hands into the blankets. "Yeah, that is pretty squishy." He stood there, looking slightly awkward. "So are you going to join me?" Adriana asked, unable to keep the amusement from her voice. Eric smirked, pushing his hands into his pockets. "I thought you wanted to take that dress off first." "Aha!" Adriana said, grinning but fumbling for something to say. "I may need some assistance with that." "Well, I'm more than willing to offer my services should you need it." "Okay, first item of business." Adriana stretched out her hands. "Help your fat wife up." Eric burst into laughter, walking around the bed to grasp her hands and pull her up. "You're not fat, don't say that." "Now I know," she grinned. "But just you wait, it's coming." "Not just yet, we've still got some time," he said, sliding his arms around her waist and pulling her close. "Not that it matters to me." "I'd say you're a winner either way," Adriana said slyly, lowering her voice and leaning closer, watching as his eyes widened ever so slightly. "You get to have all this for the rest of time, Mr. Larson." With that she turned and walked toward her overnight bag, letting him stew with that thought. What she didn't expect was for him to grab her by the arm and pull her back into his chest. His mouth was on hers before she could register what was happening. It was like her words had opened a completely new side of him, like all this time he'd been restraining this other side of himself. He kissed her hard and fast, pressing her backwards until her back pressed into the wall where he languished her with hot, open mouth kissed from her mouth to her neck and collarbone. Oh gods! She panted, pulling at his hair. In the past few months, if their kissing had taken a steamier route, it had been her doing. He'd always done his best to not get carried away. Well, now she knew why, and it was far more wonderful because he'd waited. Whether it was intentional or not, it was like she was seeing a whole new side of him for the first time. Eric paused for air, his hands deep in her hair. I told you. He swallowed, trying to catch his breath. Don't call me that. Adriana gave a chirp of laughter. Oh, babe, I'm never going to stop calling you that if that's what happens. My gods. Eric laughed, dropping another kiss to her neck. I don't even know why it's such a turn on, just hearing you say it, just. I dunno. She brushed his wavy hair back, making it stick up. You don't have to explain anything. But seriously, she pushed forward away from the wall, making him back up. This dress really is getting uncomfortable. And I have to pee. Well, that I can't help you with. Eric said, hauling her bag onto the bed. She opened it and plundered the contents for something cute and comfy that she'd saved for their first night. She swallowed and pushed away any thoughts she had about the details. She wasn't sure if she'd even need her cutesy jammies, but hey, she was at least wearing them to the potty. All right, handsome, I'll be back, Adriana said, grabbing her things and marching to the door. The outhouse is just back there, so you're aware. Eric gave her a thumbs up as she stepped outside and made her way to the outhouse just around the bend. It took a few minutes in the dark to take the dress off and change into her other clothes, including a thin cashmere robe, but she managed without a single blunder. When she returned to the domed building, she found the warmth of the furnace to be so enticing that she nearly took the handle off the sliding door. The November chill was sweeping in off the ocean, making her teeth chatter. Perhaps she should have let Eric take the dress off after all and be done with the whole thing. Geez, it is cold out there. Adriana said, slamming the door closed once more. She marched to the bed once again and snatched a hanger out of her bag. She hung her wedding dress up on a railing nearby and straightened all the folds. Give me a week and it'll never fit. She waited for Eric to reply with a statement about how he'd still love her no matter how fat she got, but it didn't come. She turned around to find him sitting at the fire in comfier clothes, staring at her. She looked down at the short, thin material wrapped around her body. Like it? Eric swallowed hard and nodded. Adriana withheld a laugh and gestured him toward her with a finger. It's super duper soft, want to feel? He slid off the edge of the furnace and instantly winced. Adriana's smile dropped. Are you okay? Yes. Yes, I'm fine. Eric said, even as she marched toward him and bent to pull his pant leg up. Annie, it's fine. She looked over his stump with a careful eye. Babe, it's swollen, why didn't you say something? Adriana stood. Do you need ice? No, it's fine, really. I didn't even notice it until I sat down and realized it was throbbing. Eric said, sighing in irritation. It swells up on long days like this. Oh. Adriana said simply. Eric slid his arms up her sides and hummed. It is super duper soft, he said, pulling her in close. He leaned back against the edge of the furnace and she leaned into him, feeling the warmth of the fire seeping into his back. MHM. Adriana said, resting her cheek on his shoulder. He began to rub circles into her back and for a few minutes they stayed like that, enjoying each other's embrace. After a while she felt her eyes begin to droop. Hey, Eric whispered. HM. She sat up, playing with his shirt. Why don't we just go to bed? Eric asked. Honestly, we're both exhausted. Adriana thought for a moment and nodded. Yeah, let's do that. As one they stood and began to prepare for bed, each locating their toothbrushes and throwing their bags off the bed once more. Adriana snickered at the already messy room. Their marriage was going to be nothing, if not cluttered. Eric threw another few logs into the furnace as she threw a couple of the fur blankets back. She crawled into the bed and instantly snuggled deep into the blankets. Yoo-hoo, Mr. Lesuun, come join me. Eric snickered from the furnace. Now really, if we plan on just going to sleep, let's not start that up again. Just making sure you're not falling asleep over there. Impossible, Eric said, finally emerging at her side. I wouldn't leave you waiting. He threw the blankets back, giving her a blast of cold air compared to the heat beneath the blankets. Oh! Adriana grabbed the blankets and yanked them back up to her chin. Kinda drafty in here without those on. Oh gods, our first fight as husband and wife because it's too drafty without your blankets. Eric sighed, snuggling in close to her side and burying his nose in her neck. Whatever shall I do? Adriana jerked when he blew a raspberry under her chin. Go to sleep, Eric. He snickered and pulled her closer under the warm blankets. If you insist, Mrs. Larson. The words made her heart leap, and she shifted deeper into the blankets to be as close to him as possible. After all their years together as best friends, after so much time spent together wondering, hoping, dreaming, they were finally husband and wife, inseparable by anything except death itself. For the first time ever she fell asleep in her husband's arms, confident and safe, and eager to start the next step of their adventure. Chapter 31, Love Struck. Chapter text. Adriana's head felt like it was stuffed with cotton. She didn't know what time it was, but she knew it was warm and super comfy, and she never wanted to move. A hand snaked around her torso and pulled her closer under the sheets. Eric sighed into her neck, making her smile despite herself. How long had she dreamt of this exact moment happening, waking up beside her husband for the first time? Early morning snuggles. I always wanted to wake up with your hair in my face. Adriana snorted and elbowed him in the ribs. Ow. None of that now, Eric said, sitting up. Adriana stubbornly kept her eyes closed, but she was failing utterly to keep her face straight. There are other methods of retaliation. He dug his fingers into her waist and she gasped, thrashing away. No. No, 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 come on, not right now. Adriana whined. Eric laughed, bent over and kissed her soundly. His body was warm against hers and one of his hands slid down to rest on her belly. How's the little princess? Oh, tapping on my ribs for the last hour. Maybe she's trying to play music. Adriana asked, stretching her arms over her head and yawning. Careful, you open that pretty mouth wide enough and notes might start spilling out. Eric teased. All she has to do is jab here, and here, and here. Adriana cackled, kicking to escape his probing fingers. Stop, one poking child is enough. I cannot resist. Well, you'd better or I won't be kissing you for the rest of the day. Eric blinked. Wow, our first day of marriage and you're already swearing off kissing. I'm sure I can survive a day. But the question, can you survive a day? Adriana gave him a roguish grin. Mr. Larson. Ark, woman. Eric flopped backward, making her laugh. So dramatic. Adriana sighed, propping her head on her palm and observing his mussed hair and dimpled smirk. Eric reached up and dragged a hand through her hair, pulling at the strands enough to cause a shiver of pleasure to run through her. Having one's hair played with was the best. His hand traveled the length of her neck and shoulder before sliding across her upper back. Her eyes were closed within seconds, relaxing into his touch. They were silent for a few minutes while he rubbed her back, up and down, up and down. His hand was warm and smooth, sliding across the material of her thin black robe. At one point he flexed his fingers, lightly scratching as he went back down. The pressure sent a tingling sensation down her spine and a soft moan escaped her. His hand stilled on her waist. When she opened her eyes, she found Eric's eyes roving her body, lingering on her hips, her chest, her neck, and he finally settled on her eyes. Her heart thumped in her chest as he reached back up and brushed her hair back. The desire in his eyes was unmistakable, but he merely gave her a wan smile. Well, she thought, that was a bit ridiculous. He couldn't set her blood on simmer like that and expect nothing in return. A small smile spread across her face, the only warning she gave him before sitting up and pushing him onto his back. What are you doing? Eric asked. Adriana merely smiled as she sat up and slowly straddled his hips, the tie on the thin robe loose enough to give him a full view of the lacy clothes beneath. And what little they did to cover her up. She watched his Adam's apple bob and he instinctively grabbed her hips as she leaned forward. Annie. Shush. Adriana whispered onto his lips. My turn. She captured his lips with hers, purposefully kissing him slowly until the grip on her waist relaxed. The tension eased out of his shoulders and he kissed her back in earnest, one of his hands sliding down to rest on her bare leg. She slanted her mouth away from his, her kisses roving down his jawline, even as she palmed his chest and shoulders. Eric sat up, pulling her closer as he kissed her faster, his mouth trailing to places he'd never been before. Gods, she didn't realize it would feel this good, with his hands and mouth roving her body, and all she wanted was more, more, more. Eric, she panted. Say it, Eric whispered, one of his hands deep in her hair, the other on her thigh. His breathing was almost as frantic as hers, but his gaze was steady. Say it. Smiling ever so slightly, Adriana ghosted his lips with hers. Mr. Larson. His dimpled smile was the last thing she saw before he kissed her once more, and when the time finally came, she held nothing back. Cold air rushed past Finn's face as he surveyed the waters below. Zap's powerful wings pumped them upward once, twice before he twisted in the saddle, her blue body shooting downwards like an arrow, faster, faster. A large blast of purple flame shot past and exploded in the waves, buffeting Zap with a heated blast of steam. Finn cursed under his breath and yanked her out of the dive, the pair zooming across the waves. They rejoined their dads in the air, both staring at them disapprovingly. Because that's what Toothless was to Zap. A dad. A frustrating, know-it-all dad. Before Finn could open his mouth, Hiccup was speaking. You're going too fast. He huffed, expecting him to say as much. How the heck are you supposed to learn to dive without going too fast? You could do without the fancy twist, Hiccup stated. You know as well as I do that those kinds of moves create momentum, which creates speed. I know. Finn growled in frustration. Zap grumbled her frustrations as well. For the last hour they'd been trying to learn how to dive into the water, as Hiccup had promised. Now that the wedding was over and Adriana and Eric had returned to Burke, his dad had told him over breakfast that he could finally teach them. Well, he was quickly regretting his decision to learn. They'd only dived into harbor twice so far, every other attempt had been cut off due to his dad's perfectionism. Hey, don't cop an attitude for trying to keep you safe, Hiccup said, arms crossed against his chest. Toothless rumbled his own lecture at Zap. You have to do it right or you'll break your neck. Finn bit back another snooky retort. They'd get nowhere if they bickered all day, and with the November chill coming full blast across the ocean, his hands were starting to go numb even with his protective flight suit on. As if on cue, Hiccup said, one more dive and let's go in. It's freezing out here. If Finn hadn't seen the uncomfortable shift in his dad's posture, the slight wince he withheld when he moved his left leg, he might have argued. Instead he said, explain it again one more time. Zap needs enough height to make a simple dive. Her nose needs to be straight down, her tail towards the sky, wings tucked in tight. You need to be as flat in the saddle as possible. When you're at the right angle, you'll feel it. You won't. Hiccup paused, thinking. You won't feel the strain of gravity against your spine. It will pull you towards the ground, if that makes sense. Right before you hit the water, press your forehead into her hide, right behind her horns. Finn nodded, looking down at the water once more. Zap too was staring at the water. Toothless gave her a barked order. A veteran training a foot soldier to fix her mistake. Zap didn't like that tone and told him as much with a growl that set Finn's teeth on edge before she flapped away, nearly pulling him out of the saddle with the force of her tone. Hey baby girl, don't listen to them. Finn paused. I mean, we should listen to them. They don't want us to get hurt, but we can do this. One more time and we'll get it, then we can go eat some fish, okay? Zap huffed in agreement. Finn adjusted his grip on the straps of his saddle. The winds buffeted them to and fro for a moment. They waited until it settled and her wings leveled out. Finn exhaled. Let's do this, Zap. The shockjaw roared, flapping once more, leaning upward and then tipping her nose toward the ocean. Finn grit his teeth at the swooping sensation in the pit of his stomach as she plummeted. He glanced backward, sensing the wrong angle, feeling the wrongness of it. Farther, Zap. Tail to the sky, girl, come on. Zap roared, angling her body farther. Finn's eyes watered at the sheer cold, the speed making them drop like a rock. He waited for the plasma blast to come, for his dad's shout to sound in his ear as they dove after him and zap, but it didn't come. Panic clawed up his throat as the water's edge drew closer and he almost pulled out of the dive, wondering what the hell he was doing. Zap's wings shot out and Finn slammed his forehead into her hide, praying he wasn't about to die as they finally plummeted into the depths. Hiccup and Toothless flew above the water's edge, searching for the young pair with eager green eyes. He'd known the second Finn realized their error because Zap had finally straightened out and shot toward the water. Fast, once again too fast, but perfect alignment. Even Toothless had barked in worry as they'd hit the water. But he always knew when someone dove wrong. He could always hear the sound of water and bone snapping. As long as Zap didn't drown his son, they were probably fine. At last the water surged upward, Zap flapping her wings, taking more than a few attempts to get airborne. Toothless shot to them, Hiccup's worry rising when Finn leaned over the edge hacking. "Are you alright?" Hiccup asked, slapping his back. Finn's face was white, his freckles standing out. "Yeah." He coughed again and sat up, shaking off his soaked arms. His suit might need reinforcing if it got soaked after only 3 dives. I panicked for a second and inhaled on the way back up. Hiccup fought a laugh. "With more practice you'll be able to train yourself not to do that. Fighting for air is a natural instinct. But we'll practice more another day. You don't need to catch your death of cold." "Nor you," Finn replied, shaking off a shiver. The dragons flapped toward the village. Hiccup noticed Zap's fatigue and made a mental note to lather her up with fish oil that night. Strong and large she may be, she was still young by dragon standards. It seemed the same for Finn, whose teeth were chattering by the time they reached the house. Astrid would give him a tongue lashing if Finn got sick. Together they housed the dragons in the barn and stored the saddles, and ran for the house just as a storm of flurries blew in from the sea. They slipped inside, both thanking the gods for the steamy warmth and blowing on their numb hands. When their wet boots were removed, the haddock men turned to see something truly strange. Yes, that was Cliff Smedley giving his wife a foot massage. "Wait," Finn began. "Shush," Cliff whispered. "Mama Astrid is relaxing." "Do I get the next foot massage?" Hiccup asked, coming around the couch to rub his wife's shoulders. She merely hummed contentedly. "Chief, if only you've heard the stories I have about your toes." Finn snorted from the kitchen, nursing a steaming mug of cider. He handed Hiccup a cup when he returned, his fingers instantly thawing against the large mug. Once upon a time, his own father had used this mug. Hiccup gave it a simpering smile before taking a long drink, the cider warming his insides. Astrid stirred, cutting off Cliff's story of Hiccup horrendous haddock the third's toes, the horrendous in his name of course attributing to said digits, only when Finn plopped on another chair, a breath hissing through his still chattering teeth. "Finn. I'm fine." "Bruh, you are not fine if you're that cold," Cliff stated plainly, setting Astrid's foot down and hopping to his feet. "Bath time." Finn turned a glare up at his friend, his usually bright hair damp. "Don't you dare." Cliff merely smiled and traipsed into the spacious washroom down the hall. Soon hot water was running and Cliff re-emerged with a cloud of steam that smelled of lavender, gesturing to his friend. "Come now, we shan't be acquiring pneumonia today. Do you need to hold my hand T2, mom?" "Finn, get in there," Astrid demanded. "Or I will drag you in there myself." Finn sighed, Hiccup smirking at his stubborn son's back as he pushed past Cliff. The curly-haired boy started following him into the room and Finn whirled around, a finger pointing in his face. "Cliff, so help me." Hiccup laughed, grabbing Cliff's arm and pulling him away before his son got violent. "Thanks for the help, Cliff, but I think Finn can take it from here." Cliff grinned. "Okay then." Hiccup vaguely wondered if the boy did these things on purpose. Finn's ice glare was the last thing they saw before the washroom door snapped to a close. The Smedley boy observed some of the old weapons and trinkets posted around the room. Hiccup vaguely wondered about the boy. Eric hadn't been kidding when he said Cliff had an affinity for invading people's personal space. What exactly had they gotten themselves into? He wasn't worried though. Cliff was a good kid. They'd just have to adjust and get used to another young man in the house. Gods, Hiccup realized. He'd never had two boys living under his roof before. Finn and Cliff got along for the most part, he'd rarely seen them fight. The next few months would be interesting for sure. Cliff, have you ever considered becoming a healer? Astrid asked. Or some kind of assistant for your aunt? Cliff's eyes widened in surprise. I've never thought about it. I think you'd be good at it. You're good at talking to people when they're upset and you like to take care of people, Astrid said, placing a hand on Hiccup's. He knew this gesture as a request to stop massaging her shoulders, so he walked around the couch and sat beside her, reveling in her warmth. You certainly helped Eric with his personal issues a few years ago. Hiccup added. Yeah, but that was because he's my friend. Cliff said, plopping onto an armchair. I don't know if I could help just anybody because I like to. Sure, you could, with the right training, Hiccup said. Astrid shrugged. It was just a thought. Turning to her husband, she said, how'd it go? Other than returning him to the house on death's door. Hiccup snorted. He'll be fine, I just need to reinforce his suit to keep out the water. The last dive was the best. With some more practice they'll get better. Zap was exhausted by the end. Cliff huffed a laugh. You won't be getting me and Bob to dive like that. She's not exactly the right proportions for that anyway, kiddo, Hiccup replied, tipping his head back with a sigh. Cliff's grunkle, Edna Louise Sacramento III, otherwise known as Bob, wasn't known for her slim features, speed or dexterity. A dangerous combination when the boy who rode her was clumsier than Hiccup himself. In fact, at one point Cliff had hopped on her back just to slide back off because he'd forgotten to tie the saddle buckles. His ankle had gotten stuck, and Edna had become frantic and half run, half flown through the entire village with the Smedley boy cackling madly at everyone to stay calm. It's all part of the plan. It had taken Hiccup jumping in front of the frantic beast and throwing a hand out to get her to stop before Cliff met an untimely demise. Perhaps a bit dramatic, but, as always, it had worked. It had certainly impressed the children and teenagers, who'd only heard stories of his former glory days. Hiccup snorted softly. He felt, more than saw, Astrid turned to him. What? Oh, nothing. HMPH, sure. Astrid said before snuggling into his chest. She was so warm against his still cold limbs, he kinda half wished they were alone. A clatter of a wooden door sounded and a chirp of a growl sounded above them in the rafters. Hiccup opened his eyes to see a blue terrible terror climbing its way down the wooden beams toward him. It finally flapped the remaining distance down and settled on his knee, sticking out its leg where a message had been tied. Hiccup tugged off the tie with a hand and frowned at the neat scrawl. Greetings, Hiccup. I realize we spoke a few days past in regards to assisting with dragon training, and I truly don't wish to bother you so soon, but I wanted to inform you that we've caught a few more dragons the last few days. They are causing mayhem, making it difficult for my men to keep the dragons that we've already somewhat trained under control. We could really use any assistance you have to offer, even if it's a few chosen trainers to help. Please assist at your greatest convenience. Warmest regards. Chief Ivan of Jut. Trouble in Jut. Astrid murmured, reading the message. Nothing short of begging, Hiccup replied with a sigh, handing the message to the ever-so-eager Cliff. It must be bad. Oh, I wonder what kind of dragons they caught. Cliff stated, excitement lighting his grey eyes. Will you go or will you appoint someone? Hiccup sighed again, rubbing Astrid's shoulder. Honestly, I'd love to go, but with the convocation coming so soon. I put off a lot of our preparations for the wedding, and now that it's over, I need to focus back on preparing. Hosting all the chieftains and their villages is no simple feat. Every day I don't prepare. We get it. Astrid interrupted his rambling. So tell him you can't make it and send some of our best riders. Heck, send me if you want to. No, I need you here. Even Snotlout and Fishlegs, they are so closely tied to the plans, building short-term housing and food storage. To send the twins, even just Toughnut would be a disaster. Astrid straightened, her blue eyes boring into his. Send Finn. Hiccup blinked. That wasn't a half-bad idea. She must have seen the unsurety in his eyes because she plowed forward, He needs a challenge. This would be a great opportunity for him to meet the Jatans, learn how they operate, build trust between our villages, between him and Ivan. Astrid glanced toward the closed washroom door, probably wondering if their son was listening. Honestly, you won't be chief forever, Hiccup. He's going to need all the allies he can get. I know. Hiccup thought it through. Finn was easily one of the best riders on Berk, even though most veteran riders had been flying 20 years prior to his birth. Most of the time he was level-headed and organized, plus he knew hand-to-hand combat and on how to fight on Dragonback. As long as he kept that stubbornness and cockiness under control. What better way to try and err than in the field where people's lives are his responsibility? Astrid asked. Hiccup winced. Well, when you put it that way, Astrid. He could do it. Astrid sat up, indignance lacing her voice. I have complete faith in him. So do I. I'm not expecting him to fail, Hiccup countered. But what if something goes wrong? That could ruin his reputation for the Jatans, or even our own people. Something happens under his watch. He's only 17, Astrid. Is he ready for that kind of responsibility? You were. Astrid replied. Hiccup pursed his lips. He'd need to think about it more. Don't underestimate him based on his age, Hiccup, Astrid said quietly, blue eyes flicking to the still listening Cliff. He knows the cost of carelessness. Hiccup looked at Cliff, who started like he'd been caught eavesdropping. What do you think? Me? Cliff asked in surprise. You're around Finn enough to have an opinion, and I value his friends' opinions as much as my own. Hiccup replied. So what do you think? Cliff swallowed, pulling at a string on his sock. Well, I think it would be good. He doesn't like to sit around, and I think he feels like he's done a lot of that since his injury. He wants to be helpful, to know what he's doing is actually worth something. And this would be his first big test since everything happened with the gang. He's worked his butt off trying to make up for those mistakes. So Cliff shrugged. Maybe all he needs now is an opportunity to show his people how much he's changed and how competent he is to other villages. To train another fleet of dragon riders. Cliff smiled, meeting their gazes. I think that would make an awesome comeback. Hiccup smiled. And this is the reason why I ask for my kids' friends' opinions. His wife was also beaming. Aren't you grateful that you have some good friends, Finn? Hiccup turned in surprise. Finn was leaning against the wall just outside the washroom. He'd never even heard the door open. It seemed Cliff also hadn't heard his friend re-emerge. Finn was staring at Cliff with surprise. You really mean that? Cliff looked a bit uncomfortable, but he nodded. You deserve the chance to redeem yourself, man. Plus he smiled suddenly. You've been whining about going to Jet for months. Finn smirked. That's true. How much did you hear? Astrid asked as their son walked into the living room and sat on the armchair opposite of Cliff's. Not much, but I kinda pieced it together once I heard Cliff's speech on redemption. Finn sighed, slumping into the chair. He'd changed into warm wool pajama pants and a loose white shirt. He'd towel-dried his hair, giving it a tousled look. Except Hiccup could see the lower half of his slave mark at his right temple. Softly clearing his throat, Hiccup subtly touched his temple. Finn quickly brushed his hair down, probably hoping Cliff hadn't noticed, but the other teen was staring down at the note once again, almost as if he could draw out more information just by staring at it. Finn instantly relaxed and cleared his throat. Anyway, you guys don't have to send me if you don't want to. Well, I think it's up to you, Finn. Hiccup said. I agree with your mom and Cliff, I think it's a great idea. I wasn't sure at first, but they're right. You've worked hard and there's no better way to test it than to give you a shot. Granted it's a big shot and I hesitate to put people's lives in your hands. Hiccup sighed. But your mom's absolutely right. I shouldn't shy away from giving you those kinds of responsibilities. One day you're going to be chief. Whether I wanted it or not, I had that on my shoulders at 17. Sometimes my dad threw it at me because he knew that I had to learn, despite my insecurities. So it's only fair that I prepare you the same way he prepared me. Finn gave a single, solemn nod. So are you going to tell Ivan? Hiccup sat up, resting his elbows on his knees. Let's think about it for a couple days. Decide who and when, and then we'll get back to him. How many people are they expecting? Finn asked. Nobody can train an entire village by himself. I certainly didn't, Hiccup said, giving his wife a wan smile. He turned back to the boys. How about this, you pick 3 people, I pick 3 people. 7 should be plenty. Our own team consisted of 6 people, occasionally 7 or 8. I can pick anyone. Finn asked. Stifling a laugh, Hiccup leaned back. With my approval, of course. And their willing consent. Chief or no, I'm not forcing anyone to go if they don't want to. No, I agree, Finn replied. I've got a few on my mind so far, but only one might take issue. Eric Astrid smiled knowingly. Cliff snorted. I dunno, bruh. You'll have to pay him handsomely to make him leave his new wife so soon. He winked, perhaps a bit too suggestively if Finn's look of disgust was any indication. Knowing the Jatans, payment will be offered without question, Hiccup said. And besides, Astrid added. Eric could always come and go, or work a few days out of the week. The Burkians who are training could maybe stay in Jat, but Eric would be willing to make the 4-hour flight every few days to see Adri. Agreed, Hiccup nodded. Next time you see him, ask. Decide who your people are going to be and I'll decide mine. We'll approach them after we've made our final decisions and talked to Ivan though. There's no point involving a bunch of people if we don't take that route. One question though, Finn said, leaning against a palm. Not to sound self-deprecatory, but what if Ivan doesn't want me? What if he wants you? Hiccup sighed. Kiddo, the best they are going to get is you. Snoggletog is in a month, and after that we have to start preparing for 2 things, your sister's baby and the convocation. Finn and Cliff shared a blink. Adriana's baby was due sooner than they'd realized. We have to be ready for her at the drop of a hat, and the convocation is going to be the biggest event Berks had in years. Astrid said. We can't start building the temporary housing until the ice and snow melt. Fish doesn't last in storage longer than a couple weeks and Ben can only bake so much at one time. Wouldn't it be a miracle if food could last longer than a week? Hiccup mused. Imagine if there were hubs for buying goods where food didn't spoil in a few days' time. Finn threw up a hand, expression skeptical. How would that even work? Some kind of cooling system, I suspect. Like our icebox, but built for long-term use. 2 pairs of blue eyes rolled. It'll never happen. Finn replied. Anyway, Hiccup said, pushing aside the inventor side of his brain. You're one of the best riders we've ever trained, Finn. They'd be very pleased to have you, I think. You think? No one is more qualified than you. I'd be shocked if they didn't jump for joy. Except for the small fact that I've never actually trained anyone before, except. Finn paused for a beat. Except for Binen. And even then you taught him to fly, I just showed him how to operate the saddle and reins. I can help with that, Astrid said. Training new riders has been my area of expertise for so long, I could do it with my eyes shut. I can help you draw up lesson plans, which you can use throughout the day or study them at night. I know how you don't like clutter. Hiccup nodded. And you can find your own niche in teaching, Finn, you don't have to do any of this exactly my way or your mom's way. We'll give you the tools you need to get the job done. You've just got to find your way of doing things. As long as you're patient with people and explain things in a way that starts to show improvement, you'll be fine. Finn was nodding in agreement, blue eyes slightly unfocused as he thought. Well. I'll see if I can talk to Eric, whenever he emerges. Cliff snorted. Shut up, Cliff. Finn rolled his eyes, fighting a smile. You said it, not me. Anyway, Finn stated firmer. I like the idea. You don't need to run it by the council or anything. The council. Perhaps one of the few things that made his son nervous. He'd worked so hard the last few years to treat those men and women with utmost respect and almost all had come to forgive him. But he clearly still had a nagging fear that one step in the wrong direction would send them snapping at his heels like a pack of wild dogs. The nice thing about being chief is I can override their decisions, Hiccup smirked. To a certain extent, Finn remarked. When it comes to giving my son and heir a chance to redeem himself, what I say goes. Astrid stretched. I highly doubt we'll have many arguments. Only one way to find out, I guess. Well, they can't bicker too much. Hiccup smiled. I'm mostly likely picking 3 of them to go with you. Finn's smile was slightly strained. Yay. Cliff scoffed. Oh come on, how bad can it be? Nearly a week after the wedding, spending each and every moment with his new wife, Eric realized they were running short on supplies. They'd spent their honeymoon cooking and organizing their house, gods, it was the house, and staying up till the wee hours of the night talking and, well, everything else that entailed newlywed life. But when they woke on Saturday realizing they had 1 loaf of bread left and a small amount of meat and cheese, not to mention Annie's rather depressing discovery that their wedding cake was gone, he decided to make a trip to the market. Adriana had of course wanted to come with him. Upon looking out the windows to find the snow piled a foot high, however, they'd opted her to stay inside. Eric's heart leaped at the thought of his pregnant wife waiting for him at home, all bundled up, and last week had been, wow. In so many ways, wow. And not just in the new intimacy they shared. He'd never thought their friendship could grow any stronger than it had been before they'd married, but it had. The oaths they'd taken to love and cherish each other, through the good and bad, the strength each of them found in those promises. It was the solid foundation they needed to start afresh. There'd be tough times ahead. He knew it was easy to say tough times wouldn't be as hard to deal with together than apart. She was, after all, still carrying a baby. Though he hadn't felt uncomfortable with the notion for some time, now he couldn't put a name to the possession he felt every time he saw and felt her stomach under his palm. Father. That freaked him out a little bit, but he had no doubts that he could do it. Just like any young couple first starting out, they all learned it as they went. That little boy or girl needed him, and by gods, he was going to be there. Eric's teeth chattered against the cold gusting through the streets. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, hoping he wouldn't get frostbite by the time he returned home. The only upside was that his new wife would take pity on his cold digits and find some way to warm them up. Hiding his grin, Eric finally made it to the market and shoved the heavy door aside. Usually the marketplace was an open concept to the streets so sellers could have their wares open for the public. This time of year, however, Hiccup had rolling overhead doors from the wooden rafters pulled down to cover the stalls, and a large door was installed annually so Burkians could go inside to shop. It was an ingenious idea, Eric thought thankfully as he stepped inside and shook out his legs, snow frosting the mats. A dark-haired woman of about 40 approached, a steaming mug of cider in her hands. Here you go, Mr. Larson. Thanks, Rhonda. He accepted the mug gratefully, following her into the toasty market. The spacious room was lit in an orange glow from a burning hearth in the farthest part of the room, where various meats and fish turned over the flames, filling the market with the scent of glazed ham and lemon herb trout. Eric's stomach rumbled, thankfully hidden by his thick coat. At least he hoped the woman didn't notice. Rhonda had been running large parts of the marketplace for most of her life, and feeding hungry folk was one of her pastimes. She always offered mugs of cider and mead to her customers in the cold months, free of charge. Generosity was her coin. Kind as she was though, he'd rather take food home to his wife and enjoy it in her company than in the dim marketplace. Treading the lined boxes of vegetables and spices, breads of various sizes and flavors, and of course the dessert tables filled with pies, tarts, chocolates and biscuits. He filled a sack with as much as he could think he and Annie liked and ordered Rhonda to cut him a few pounds worth of glazed ham. As she retreated to the back and he counted out his coins to pay, the heavy door opened. The blast of cold air made the flames from the fire sputter and the hanging lanterns swayed momentarily. Eric looked over his shoulder to see a familiar young man clad in a deep blue flight suit, mask covering his face. Finn marched toward the fire and nearly stuck his hands into the open flame, not even bothering to remove his gloves or mask. Rhonda, cutting the meat beside him, gestured with her chin. You do that and you'll melt the leather right off the tips. Shivers racked Finn's body. I'll replace them if I have to. He retracted his hands and hopped up and down. Gods, it's so freaking cold. Eric raised a brow. The cold doesn't typically bother you that much. Finn turned, surprise all over his tall frame, almost as if he hadn't even noticed his friend there. "Oh, hey you finally." He reached up to remove his mask. Eric frowned at the buckles that seemed frozen shut with small icicles. Finn's face was bright red when it finally came loose. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Eric smirked. "I'd respectfully submit to you that I never left." Finn held up a hand. "Spare me." Rhonda scoffed beside him, packing the meat Eric had ordered. Eric looked at the growing puddle of water under Finn's feet. "Tell me you're not wet." The air sighed. "Zap and I have been practicing. Diving in the ocean, that is. In this weather?" Eric asked, aghast. "You're going to get sick." Finn scowled. "I'm fine." "Why can't it wait until spring?" "Because I don't want to wait until spring." Eric rolled his eyes, accepting the package of meat from Rhonda, knowing full well the pointlessness of arguing. "Thanks." He handed her the money and some extra for a tip. He turned away quickly, hoping to escape before she noticed. Rhonda didn't like being tipped, but she gave away so much for free that Eric felt bad. She needed to make money too. Finn followed him out the door. His already damp hair turned quickly to frost in the gusting wind. Eric pursed his lips to keep from lecturing him. Finn could be reckless, but he could take care of himself. "So hey, I wanted to ask you something," Finn said, dodging a patch of ice in the street. "What is it?" Finn quickly explained the letter his dad had received from Ivan and how his parents thought Finn should take on the responsibility of training the Jatans. That he needed to pick 3 companions to go with him and help. "I know you just got married, so I don't expect you to go with me full-time," Finn said. "In fact, you can say no, I won't be offended. But I wanted to ask and see what you thought." Eric thought, the idea of him helping to train the Jatans exciting and an honor to be considered. But he had to put Annie and the baby first now. He needed to work to provide for them. His time wasn't his own now, he couldn't just up and go like he could have even a few short weeks ago. "Let me talk to Annie about it," he said finally. "See what she thinks and I'll let you know." Finn nodded as if he'd expected the answer. "We won't be leaving for at least another week, whoever goes with me. I'm on my way to see Helga now. With all this snow and wind, everyone's been holed up in their houses, so I haven't had a chance to ask anyone else." "Who's your third choice?" Eric asked, his and Annie's house finally appearing. Finn paused on the porch, crossing his arms across his chest. "I'm not sure. Maybe Thorin, maybe Evan." "Who's your dad asking to go?" "Snotlout and Fishlegs, I think." "Good choices," Eric nodded. He watched his friend's teeth chatter through the next gust of wind. "Why don't you come in?" Finn shook his head, amusement in his eyes. "I'm good." Eric rolled his eyes. "Finn, come on. Are you seriously that afraid of me and Annie now?" Finn straightened. "I'm not afraid." "Then stop dancing around me like I'm foreign to you," Eric said, hiding his smirk. "You're cold, I'm cold, and the house is warm. And like me and Annie are going to do anything with you around anyway," Eric didn't need to add. Blue eyes narrowed for a moment as if considering his answer before he finally sighed. "Fine, but just for a few minutes. I really do have to see Helga before it gets dark." "Right." Eric pushed the door open and led them inside. Finn grabbed the handle to push the door closed, but before he could move it an inch, a distinctly female voice roared from the next room. "Close the door." Finn snapped it shut with the speed of an adder. Eric snickered, setting the sack of food on the table. "I hope you're decent, Your Highness," Finn called. "You've got a visitor." "Opu," Adriana said in a pouting voice. One that made Eric wonder, and hope, if she was actually wearing something a bit too revealing for others' eyes. He should have realized the sarcasm though when she emerged in long fuzzy pajama pants and a large fur wrapped around her body. "I had other plans for this afternoon." Finn pursed his lips, probably wishing that he hadn't said anything. Eric snickered again, unloading the sack. She peered at the items and cooed with delight when she found a package of brownies. "Oh, you do know how to treat a lady, Mr. Larson." Eric scowled in false irritation at the name usage. Adriana merely gave her a chocolatey grin and embraced her brother. "A week, brother, I think that's the longest we've gone without seeing each other. Adriana stepped back quickly. Oh my, you're freezing. Here, take this. I'm fine. Finn sighed, even as she threw the fur around his shoulders. Adriana padded back to their room to grab a second. Eric snorted at the sight of his friend standing on the threshold in his flight suit, wrapped in a very large, bushy fur blanket. Oh, be quiet. So what brings you to our humble abode? Adriana asked, plopping on the couch. Eric grinned. Our humble abode. Finn shrugged. Just stopping in for a minute. He nodded to her stomach, poking out from the folds of her fluffy pink blanket. How's the little guy? Poking and prodding, as always. She smiled, patting her belly. We've got a kicker. Good man, Finn said, leaning against the door. I'm going to laugh so hard when it's a girl, Eric said, finally storing the last of the items in the kitchen and sitting beside his wife. As expected, she was super warm and he easily stole half her blanket, to her dismay. It's a boy, Finn said. I can tell. PFT, Adriana scoffed. How's that? Intuition. Adriana scoffed again. Just for that I hope it's a girl, to prove you wrong. Oh, very mature, Finn smirked. You guys pick any names yet? Eric looked at Adriana knowingly. A few. But not many have really stuck. Care to share? Nope, Adriana said, snuggling deeper into the couch. It's a secret. Even though none of them have stuck, so it shouldn't matter. Finn asked. You should tell me and I'll let you know what's a good choice and what's a bad choice. Eric and Adriana snorted. Someday you can name your own kids, dude. Kidding, kidding, Finn raised his hands. I trust you guys will pick names worthy of the Larson name. Adriana beamed, making Eric's insides turn to jelly. Gods, she was gorgeous. Anyway, think about what I told you, Eric, and let me know ASAP so I can plan, Finn said, tossing his fur into a nearby chair. I've got to get going. What did you tell him? Adriana asked. I'll tell you in a little bit, Eric replied. HMPH. I'm off to Helga's, thanks for letting me warm up, Finn said, saluting them goodbye with his mask. Anytime, Eric said. I'll send you a message with what we decide. Finn let himself out and quickly closed the door. Adriana hid under her blanket until the cold air disappeared. Eric sighed, leaning his head back against the couch. There was a moment of quiet before Adriana threw her blanket off, grabbing his attention when she placed a hand on his shoulder. Finally she sighed, suddenly straddling his hips and kissing him. Eric sighed and kissed her back eagerly, trailing his hands up her back and underneath her shirt. As he'd expected, she had nothing on underneath, which explained half the reason she'd been bundled up so tightly. She made quick work of the buttons on his shirt and kissed down his neck and chest, her mouth leaving a wet trail that sent goosebumps down his arms with the slight chill in the room. Her teeth scraped his collarbone and he groaned, all thoughts suddenly flying from his head. He pulled her mouth back to this and kissed her thoroughly, one of his hands deep in her hair and the other at her hip. Tell me what you want, Adriana whispered in his ear, sighing when he mouthed her neck. You, Eric groaned. It was crazy and insane how instinct had taken over the last week, how he'd been so unsure how this would turn out, how long he thought he'd have to wait until she was ready for them to go down this road. How she'd given him her heart and soul so willingly, that she trusted him with more than just her heart but also her body, having no doubt that he'd ever hurt her. The fact he was perhaps the only person on the planet that she allowed to pick up her broken pieces and put her back together. There was nothing more in the world that he wanted than to make her happy, to show her just how much he loved her and wanted to keep her safe. Still, he had to be careful though. She was still pregnant and no matter how much he wanted to show her just how much he could please her, he still had to be careful. And remind her to do the same. He pulled his face out of her hair as he grabbed his belt, quickly undoing it. Annie, we should. No, I want it here, she gasped, green eyes bright. Babe, we have to be careful, we'll be careful, just Adriana pulled back enough to take a deep breath. Eric was grateful for it, his own mind was hazy. It's fine. It'll be okay. Eric rubbed his hands over the swell of her belly, looking longingly at their child. I just don't want something to happen because we were careless. I know. Adriana rested her hands over his. We will be. She pressed her forehead against his, staring into his eyes. Trust me. Anything they'd done up to this point had been in their room. He'd been nervous to do anything else with the risk of hurting her or the baby. The thought gave him enough pause on numerous occasions thus far, and for good reason. If he had to restrain himself for the next few months for the sake of their child, he'd do it. It would be more than worth it in the end. Trust me, Adriana whispered, as if seeing the unsurety in his eyes. She kissed him gently and Eric leaned into the kiss, sliding his hands up her back. Trust me, she whispered again, tipping head back to kiss him more thoroughly. Okay, Eric whispered back. It only made sense, he vaguely thought, that he should trust her just as much as she trusted him. That she trusted him to be careful, so he should trust her to do the same. This time, he didn't stop her, and followed her into oblivion. Finn knew sexual tension when he saw it. That's why he scampered out there as fast he could. Gods bless them, they tried to be subtle, but alas, with Adriana's two poignant jokes and Eric's lingering stares. Well, it didn't take a genius to know what was on their mind. He decided not to think too hard about it. Except if she wasn't already expecting, they'd probably be pregnant by now anyway. Perhaps he was being a little ridiculous, he thought as he left Helga's house, arm throbbing from the whopping punch she'd given him to accentuate her pronounced, "Yes, I'll go to jet with you." His sister and Eric had just gotten married, and that was primarily what newlyweds did when they got married. He hadn't really given it much thought until they'd actually gotten married and he realized it would be happening. Duh. He wondered just how many little minions they'd have in the years to come. Their village was going to become overrun with little blue and green-eyed blondes. Snorting at the thought, Finn tramped into his house with barely restrained shivers, shaking off his boots and hanging up his helmet. His parents looked up from their spots in the living room, smiling in greeting. Toothless trotted over from his lava rock and gave him a fishy burp. "Ah, you're truly disgusting," Finn sighed, waving away the hot air. Toothless merely chortled and returned to his lava rock. "Where've you been on this truly cold day?" Astrid asked, returning to sharpening her axe. Finn shrugged, ambling toward the stairs. "Oh, you know. Stuff." "What sort of st?" His mom's voice cut off just as his boots hit the first step. "Is your hair wet?" He cringed, waiting for the explosion. But from which parent would it come first? "Tell me you weren't diving without me today," Hiccup's voice said. Finn turned back to the living room with a winced apology. "Finn. Sorry." Astrid dropped her axe on the table with a clatter. "I cannot believe you." Mom. It's like 10 degrees outside." Finn held back the near instinctual roll of his eyes. He knew it had been a stupid decision, like everything else in his life. When he learned something new he had to practice until he could do it flawlessly. Diving into the ocean in sub-zero temperatures, he was probably asking for trouble. Honestly, all he wanted to do now was go upstairs and bundle up in some warm clothes. Even Eric had noticed his uncontrollable shivering earlier. "Stop being so reckless. If you're going to jet, you need to be trusted to know when it's just plain silly to do things like that." Irritation flashed in his chest. "Thanks for the note of confidence, Mom." Her blue eyes iced over. "Don't give me that tone." "Well, I'm not a child, granted it was stupid. I won't do it again if my stupidity will ruin my chances to redeem myself. Finn looked away, unsure where the unspoken words had come from. Hiccup stood from his seat, concern on his features. "Do you not want to go to jet?" "No, I do." "Then." Hiccup seemed at a loss for words. Finn huffed. "I don't know, okay. I'm just tired. I won't go diving like that while it's cold, okay." Honestly, he just wanted to go to bed. "Not that it matters, I've been cold all week, inside and outside." Hiccup's eyes narrowed. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Finn's forehead. He flinched back, wanting to back away. "He wasn't sick, for God's sake. Has your wound been hurting?" Hiccup asked. Finn blinked. "No. You have a fever and you've been racked with shivers all week. What does that have to do with the wound?" "Symptoms of infection." He's been healed for months, Astrid said slowly. She felt his forehead too, face tightening. Upstairs. Finn blinked. He hadn't even considered that he might have a fever. He followed his mom up the stairs, confused. What kind of infection? Astrid demanded as he went in his room to change. I doubt it's anything serious, Hiccup said from downstairs. Traumatic stab wounds require lots of care and attention. Overworking your body, even a few months afterwards, can strain the injury. Especially if organs are damaged. Finn sighed, realizing how careless he'd been the last month. Sometimes his wound would throb, but he hadn't realized it was his body's way of telling him to take it easy. He hung up his flight suit and yanked on a pair of warm pajama pants before inspecting the wound in the mirror. The scar was short, but he knew Kale's blade had gone deep. He could only remember flashes before the extraction, but he vaguely remembered seeing the handle protruding from beneath his rib cage. He was lucky to be alive. Feeling the scar, it did feel a little warm. Finn was frowning when his mom knocked and entered the room. She paused, waiting. Finn huffed, retracting his hand. Is this going to affect me going to Jut? Hiccup emerged from the stairs a moment later. Not if you're careful. But if you still have a fever in a week. The fever might not go away that quickly, Finn countered. Astrid felt the scar area as well, frowning at the warmth there. It hasn't affected my ability to work or fly. All that diving into the ocean is probably what's doing it, Hiccup said, crossing his arms. You were fine before the wedding. The Jutans might see you shivering like a leaf in a storm and see right through it. Astrid said. I don't know, Finn. Please don't make me sit here, Finn said, hating the begging tone. I'll be careful, but winter's only starting. Eric has fevers all the time and his injury was almost 3 years ago, it doesn't stop him. No more diving and I'll take it easy. His parents shared a look. Hiccup seemed to be more understanding. Finn had refrained from mentioning that even in the worst storms, his dad got fevers and was in bed for a day. If anyone understood, it was him. His overprotecting mom, though. Her blue eyes bore into his own. Finn didn't drop his pleading look and waited patiently. Not to give her the kicked puppy look, but he wanted to go out and do something. Finally she relented. All right. But I'm still going to talk to Mara. If she gives you any tonics or herbs, I expect you to take them. Finn smiled victoriously, snatching a shirt off a recently folded pile on his bed. Yes. Inga crushed the herbs in the bowl with furious grinds of the stone. She added a few drops of lavender for healing and irritation, and lemon to boost immunity. Not that she cared. Honestly, she was tempted to drop something in the tonic just for her amusement. She could put in a few drops of blue dye to make his teeth and tongue blue for days, or even add cayenne pepper. Make it as difficult for him to choke down as possible. The healer said you need to take this so bottoms up. Dropping the stone with a clatter, she poured the tonic in a small jar and corked it. She set it down on the edge of the counter toward Mara, who still stood there with raised eyebrows. Inga grabbed a few more ingredients to start on another tonic when she realized Mara was staring. What? Inga snapped. Mara's expression changed to incredulity. What has got your panties in a twist? Inga huffed, dumping a generous amount of oil in a bowl. Nothing. Nothing, Mara mused. You were completely fine until I mentioned F. Don't say his name. Inga roared, brandishing a spoon at the healer. I don't want to hear his stupid name again today. All everyone is talking about is how His Highness is going to Jut to train dragons. Are you upset he didn't ask you to go with him? Go, Inga broke off with a harsh laugh, returning back to her dish of oils and herbs. Go with that big jerk. Why in the world would I want to go anywhere with him? Mara sighed behind her. Inga finished another tonic and placed it in a basket, before starting on a salve for a little boy who had super dry skin in the winter. She liked the work, it had been a distraction from the cold and the stupid boy who dashed her heart to pieces. She was sick and tired of everyone talking about him everywhere she went. Why couldn't they talk about some more interesting, like the weather? Good grief, he wasn't perfect by any means, who cared if he went to another village to train people? She didn't care. In fact, she'd be glad when he was gone. A gentle hand rested on her shoulder and she froze. Mara stood beside her, giving her a firm but kind look. You weren't wrong to like him. Inga ground her teeth together, glaring at the Sav. Boys are complicated. And Finn, he's got a lot on his plate. He's older and one day he's going to be chief. Because who would want the lowly healer's apprentice as a wife? Inga muttered darkly, mixing the Sav once more. No, Mara replied sharply. Don't you believe that for a second, Inga. You've got many wonderful qualities, but you're still young. I'm sure he didn't do anything to hurt you on purpose. He knew it would be difficult. But there are a lot of people watching him and, perhaps the thought of courting a girl a few years younger than him might look unethical. Inga's face burned in anger. Unethical? Mara sighed, rubbing her shoulder. It might not make sense right now. But perhaps one day you'll understand and appreciate. Inga dropped her tools and stomped to the door. Oh, I'm sure someday I'll look back and appreciate being jerked around, Mara, thank you for that insight. Inga, you didn't. Inga flung the door open so hard it nearly flew off the hinges, slamming against the house with the wind. She ran into the snow, ignoring Mara's calls to come back. She wasn't going to stay in there for another second, listening to her boss drone on and on about relationships. The woman wasn't even married. She ran through the streets, dodging the few people walking about in the snow. She wished Misty was here, then she'd take off and fly away from this wretched place, get some fresh air and not be surrounded by stupid boys and know-it-all bosses. But sadly her dragon was hit with a bout of dragon pox last week and was stuck in their barn, being tended to by her dad. She wouldn't be flying anywhere for at least another few days. She was running so fast that she didn't have time to stop when an auburn-haired boy stepped out from a side street. Inga slammed into him and they went sprawling into the street. Inga yelped when they hit the ground, an apology already on her lips when he groaned in shock and pain. She sat up, brushing snow off his coat and she froze. Alton. Her friend gave her a wan smile. Breaking ribs was not on my agenda today. Gods, are you all right? Inga asked, standing and pulling him to his feet. He groaned and patted his torso. Yeah, you just knocked me clean over, that's all. Where are you headed to so fast? Inga huffed, her breath clouding in front of her face. I don't know. Anywhere but work, home. Burke. A strong wind blew her hair out of her face and she shuddered, hugging herself. That was when she realized Mara had been trying to tell her that she forgot her coat. Alton seemed to notice at the exact same moment. Where's your coat? He demanded. Mara's. Inga replied lamely. Well here, take mine, Alton said, quickly unbuttoning his own. Inga raised a hand. No, it's fine. It's not fine, you'll catch your death, Alton insisted, forcing the coat around her shoulders. Besides, your house on the other side of the island. You're not walking home without a coat on. Inga sighed again, stuffing her arms down the sleeves. She was instantly warm. The coat was of fine make, the supple leather heavy and lined with sheep's fur. She wondered if he'd bought the coat on his travels with Johan. Thank you, she said gratefully. She was glad to see he had a couple long-sleeved shirts on, which would keep him warm for at least a few minutes. You're welcome, Alton said, smiling. Excited for Snoggletalk. Coming up fast. Inga wrapped her arms around herself and stared at her boots. Yeah. Just yeah. Alton asked. You're always excited for Snoggletalk. It was true, Snoggletalk was her favorite holiday. She loved the decorations and baking and walking the firelit streets at night, and shopping in the market for tasty treats. Waking up at the crack of dawn to see what Odin put in her helmet, and pretending for her brother's sakes that her parents hadn't done another excellent job of gifting. Hiding sly smiles behind her brothers' backs when they opened the gifts she'd gotten them. Lately though she wasn't looking forward to it. She hated to admit it, even to herself, but she'd been trying for so long to get Finn's attention, she'd hoped that maybe this year they could do some of those things together. Alton took a step closer, pulling her back to reality. Inga. She tried to fight it. But with the concerned, caring look in his brown eyes, she couldn't help the tears that welled up. Hey, what's wrong? Alton asked, bending slightly to look in her eyes. Inga grabbed him in a tight hug and burst into tears. Alton didn't waste time in hugging her back. What happened? She hated crying like this, like some kind of baby, but it simply wasn't fair. Had Finn really played on her affections, or was she overreacting? Was it really that unethical to think they could have had something? Did Finn find it embarrassing to consider her a potential girlfriend, but their age difference hindered it too much? Why, you were right, she said into Alton's shirt. Finn didn't like me and I should have just let it go. Alton stiffened for a moment. What did he say? He just said he didn't like me that way, Inga said. But Mara said he probably thought it was unethical because of our age difference. Ah. Inga pulled back slightly and wiped her face on his sleeves, trying to stem the flow. Being ridiculous. To her irritation, Alton smiled. You're not being ridiculous. Young love isn't easy to figure out. Inga raised a brow. Young love? You're a year older than me. Yes, but it's hard to figure out for all of us, Alton replied. Look at Adriana and Eric, all the stuff they've been through. They just got married after all that. Your point? My point is, stop beating yourself up, Inga. Alton set a hand on her shoulder. Maybe Mara didn't word it right, but I bet she didn't mean it to sound bad. And Finn? Something flickered in his eyes, something she couldn't place. He shrugged and continued, he's always been a flirt. I don't think he meant to toy with your emotions, but I'm not going to speak for him. If you want more answers, the only one who can help you with that is him. Inga shook her head, wiping her face on the coat sleeves again. The dried tears were starting to hurt her face in the cold. No, I don't want to talk to him again. Someday you will. But maybe it's just better to let this go. Alton said, crossing his arms to hide his hands. Besides, there are other boys willing to vie for your affections. Rolling her eyes, she gently shoved his arm. Boys are stupid. Snorting, Alton grinned and jerked his head to the side. I couldn't agree more. Come on, I'll walk you home. K. Matching his stride, Inga felt slightly better after talking it out. She hadn't seen much of Alton the last few weeks. Everything had been crazy with wedding preparations before the first big snow hit. And since, she'd been occupied with making tonics and visiting shut-ins who were fighting sickness. She'd heard through the grapevine that he'd been helping Johan with the large shipment of flowers and other wedding decorations. I've missed talking to you, she said, breaking the silence. We need to meet up more often. Alton beamed. We do. Honestly, since I've been home, I've been all over the place. Trying to find a job that I can actually stand doing. The fishery's not the greatest, but it's closer to freedom than anywhere else. You're not at the mill anymore? Inga asked. Since when? I quit before the snow hit. I couldn't handle it, those guys are a bit demanding. Alton sighed, his breath clouding in front of him. Fishing is demanding too, but at least those people understand if the fish aren't biting. Trees just stand there waiting for you to chop them down. Sounds boring. Very. Plus I got sick of pulling splinters out of my hands. And your butt, if I recall. Inga grinned. Hey, I told Mara not to tell anyone about that. Inga laughed. Come on, I could hear you crying from the next room. Alton sputtered. I wasn't crying. Sure, Inga giggled, hooking her arm through his. She noticed his shivering then. Come on, let's walk faster before you freeze to death. I've handled much worse than this on the high seas, Miss Jorgensen. I'm fine. Aha, Inga simply said and sped up their pace. We do need to meet up though, Alton said. Want to get dinner with me tomorrow? I overheard Ben the baker and cook talking earlier. They are making stew and potato rolls, and I heard a rumor that Grandma Ingerman's making brownies. You had me at stew, Inga said. Winter is just beginning and I'm already sick of it. Amen to that. A few more minutes of walking had them arriving at the Jorgensens' house. Inga hopped up the steps and started to unbutton his jacket. Keep it, Alton said firmly from the street. I have more at home. You have to walk across town. Inga stated. I'll be fine. You're going to get sick, and what a crappy healer's apprentice I'd be to allow that to happen. Says the crappy healer's apprentice who forgot her coat upon leaving the healers and won't have a coat tomorrow when she goes back to work, Alton countered. Inga floundered for a moment, having no rebuttals. Alton grinned victoriously. Keep it, Inga. I'll be fine. Meet me at the Great Hall at 6. Inga sighed. On your head be it. Yes, I'll be there. Great Alton said, already heading back down the street. See you then. Alton. Inga called, halting his retreating steps. Thanks. Not just for the coat. His smile softened. You're welcome. Night. Bye, Inga waved, watching him walk away for a few moments. She heard another gale of wind coming her way, so she quickly turned and headed inside before it could blow her away. She snapped the door closed with a sigh, letting the toastiness of the house seep into her bones. Heather stepped out of the kitchen wearing a worn apron. Oh, you're home early. Want to help me with the lamb? You sure, Inga said, stripping off Alton's coat and hanging it up. Whose coat is that? Oh, Alton's. I left mine at Mara's. Accidentally. She added quickly. Why is that? Heather asked, following her into the kitchen. Inga nearly poked her head into the furnace to smell the lamb roasting. She sighed in happiness at the smell and slight annoyance at what had transpired that afternoon. It's a long story. Well, we've got time before the boys get home. Peel those potatoes for me. Inga hopped up on the counter and grabbed a knife, pulling the basket of potatoes toward her. She quickly launched into her tale of what had happened at Mara's, how Finn and Astrid had come to the healers for advice on his old wound. Deep down Inga had been concerned, trained to look for injuries as she was. She hadn't noticed anything amiss as of late. Then again, she hadn't been looking very hard at him the last few weeks. At all. Explaining Mara's words had been difficult. Thankfully Inga had a great relationship with her mom. Heather liked to say, we girls need to stick together with all these crazy boys around. Inga might feel a little awkward revealing her feelings now and then, and while she most certainly didn't want to tell her mom everything, but it made their relationship stronger. Her mom had nearly forced her to tell her what happened when she'd come home in tears. Inga was proud to admit that it took a lot to make her cry. So naturally, her mom knew about her frustrations with the boy who was now a thorn in her side. Well, he'd always been a thorn in her side, she supposed, but now he was a literal thorn. She wanted nothing to do with him. Which made no sense, considering that deep down she still liked him. How could she not? If she didn't, she wouldn't care so much at how his words stung. Maybe his words wouldn't have stung at all if she didn't care. When her story was complete, the potatoes were peeled and boiling, the lamb cooling on a plate, and a tray of rolls steaming in a basket. Heather was quiet for a few moments before she finally responded, honestly sweetie, everything is going to work out. I know it's hard to understand, but I know what Mara meant about Finn. It's not you. But he is considered an adult, he's technically old enough to become chief at any time. So? Inga grumbled. So he has many people looking at him. Not that it would be embarrassing for people to see you as his girlfriend. But you're still very young, and to see an up-and-coming chief going out with what some would still consider to be a child, well, it sends a message, doesn't it? Inga shrugged. I guess. Who knows, sweetie, maybe in a few years he'll still be single and there will be another chance. Hope rose in her chest. You think so? Heather turned from stirring the potatoes. Don't hang on to that hope for the next few years without considering other options though. He's not the only boy out there. Who knows what the future has for you? Singling out one boy when you're just shy of 14. Inga sighed, frowning at her boots. I get it. Heather dropped her wooden spoon and hugged her daughter. Trust me, Inga. You've got plenty of time to worry about boys later. You have to admit you've got enough of them to worry about here. Grinning, Inga nodded. You're right. Besides, Heather stated, amusement in her voice as she turned back to the potatoes. Alton's pretty cute. Oh please, Mom. Inga rolled her eyes. Alton's been my best friend for years. That didn't stop Adriana and Eric. Inga pursed her lips. Her and Alton. Unlikely. They'd been best friends for years. She'd never considered him an option before. But now that she thought about it, yeah, he was kinda cute. She shook her head. She wouldn't be that girl, so quick to jump from boy to boy to boy. She wasn't desperate. She needed to go back to the old Inga, the one who was strong and fearless and didn't need a guy to be happy. When had she ever allowed herself to get so boy crazy, anyway? This was ridiculous, and it had gone on for quite long enough. Hopping down from the counter, she reached around her mom's waist and snagged a dollop of potatoes from the bowl with the tip of her finger. Hey, get outta here. Heather tapped her hand with her spoon, spattering Inga's wrist with more potatoes. Woohoo, thanks Mom. Inga cackled and ran upstairs to escape. Changing clothes and plopping onto her bed, she pushed all thoughts of Finn and Alton and boys in general out of her mind. She'd had enough of boys. Except her boys anyway, who were finally arriving downstairs, loud and obnoxious as always. Her daddy's boisterous voice echoed through the house about his wife's insanely awesome cooking skills. PSH, boys. Who needed them? Inga leaped from her bed and jumped down the stairs 3 at a time to greet her daddy and brothers home. Chapter 32, Warrior. Chapter text. Adriana was beyond sick of winter, and she was beyond sick of being pregnant. She should be grateful, her mother had remarked sweetly. At least she wasn't suffering in the sweltering summer heat. Adriana supposed this was rational, but she was bored and tired of sitting at home doing nothing. At least it felt like nothing. Decorating the baby's nursery had taken up most of the week. With her daddy's careful sketching and Eric's surprisingly steady hand at painting, a variety of terrible terrors and clouds were now painted throughout the spare room in the tiny house. The work had given her a reprieve of her boredom. Truthfully, she wasn't miserable. She just wanted to go the Great Hall or go to Taryn's or Inga's or something. All of their friends had come now and then to keep her company while Eric was working. But it was the distinct lack of her ability to go anywhere due to the icy roads that kept her spirits down. With the exception of her weekly checkups with Mara, who had not yet deemed her under house arrest as long as she was careful. She still had 2 months to go until her due date after all. She was big, but she wasn't a moose just yet. Still, she could barely contain her excitement as she donned her coat and scarf. Eric had agreed that she go with him to the market for food as well, though they weren't exactly running out. She suspected that he was taking pity on her constant state of antsiness. Adriana stared down at her boots with pursed lips. This was going to take a while. Eric emerged, a knowing smile on his face. She looked up at him through her bangs with what she was sure a pitiful expression. He crouched down with a barely restrained grin. Need some assistance, lady? She sighed, flopping back on the couch as he eased her feet into the boots. I'm so ready for this to be over. But then we won't be sleeping. Are you sure you're ready for such a sacrifice? Eric smirked, his fingers making quick work of the laces. As long as you promise to lose sleep right along with me, Adriana stated, raising her hands so he could pull her out of the depths of the couch. He complied until they stood nose to nose. I have big plans for you, mister. His teal eyes crinkled at the corners. Oh. Oh yes, Adriana nodded primly, buttoning her coat over the baby bump that seemed rather ginormous now. You see, we will be taking turns with taking care of the baby at night. Eric's smile deepened to reveal the dimples she loved so much. There's one small problem with that. Adriana grinned. I appear to be missing a few key elements to the feeding process, don't you think? Eric's gaze flicked south and she slapped his arm. He laughed and pulled her hood up, pulling her in for a brief kiss. I promise to take turns with diapers and anything else you need assistance with, Annie. Good, she hummed, kissing him once more before marching to the door. I'd expect nothing else from my beloved. He laughed again and took her hand, giving the house a quick once-over to make sure there were no remaining candles burning. They left the house and Adriana yelped at the sudden blast of cold air. She hadn't been outside properly, with the exception of outhouse trips, since her last checkup. Apparently a cold front had arrived in that time. Eric tucked her into his side and led the way down the street. Mara's was luckily not very far, so they made the trip with ease, watching for ice patches along the way. She glanced around the village, waving at those she saw. The women especially gave her a knowing smile and she beamed. In the distance she saw the hatchery and wondered if she could convince Eric to also let her go see Lily if she gave him the puppy eyes. It was warm and safe in there, not much risk of accident. They stamped their feet on Mara's doormat before entering, the warmth of the healer's fireplace welcoming. Inga was busy making poultices across the room and gave them a nod as they hung up their coats. "Hi guys," she said, a few jars tinkling together as she placed them in a basket. "How's everyone?" "Good, Inga." Adriana went to her side and lifted one of the jars. "What's this one for?" She plucked it out of her hand with pursed lips and replied, "Cliff." Adriana blinked and felt more than saw Eric stiffen. "What? Oh, you didn't hear?" Inga asked with a raised brow. "What happened?" Eric demanded. "I saw him yesterday and he was fine. Astrid dropped him off in the middle of the night with a horrible cough," Inga stated, putting the basket of poultices and medicines on a shelf. "Mara's still researching, but it could either be in the throat or in the lungs. Either way, it sounds really painful." Adriana winced, a hand on her belly. "Can we see him or?" "Nope. Mara said no visitors just in case it's in the throat. Those are usually more contagious than lung sickness." "He must have picked it up somewhere," Eric commented. "Is he alright?" "Well, he has no voice and he's coughing up a lung." "How do you think?" Inga scoffed. "He's probably more miserable that he doesn't have a voice. I'm only pleased because he can't make stupid puns like he did last summer. Mara's worried though. Being his aunt and all. Not to mention furious." Inga crossed her arms, grinning. "He and Tarin jumped in the ocean." "What?" Adriana gasped. "Why?" Eric sighed, rubbing his brow. "Why do they do anything crazy? Adventure. Well, common sense says not to jump in freezing cold water this time of year. No wonder he's sick." "That's what Mara said. Like Eric, we assumed that he'd just picked it up somewhere." Inga shook her head. "That is until Tarin showed up fretting and begging to make sure he was okay. I knew it was more than just her being a worried girlfriend because she started cleaning." Adriana and Eric shared a small laugh. One could always tell when Tarin was feeling especially stressed or guilty when she started cleaning. "So obviously I cornered her," Inga said proudly. "I told her, Tarin, if there's something you know that we don't, then you need to fess up right now. Cliff is our patient and we need to know anything that might have happened so we can know how to take care of him." And then it was like opening the floodgates. She told me the whole story. Inga shook her head. "She's got guts, I'll give her that. If any stupid boy tried to make me do that, I'd drop him like a sack of potatoes." Eric snickered. "Well, I'm sure they'll both learn their lesson. Adventures are good but they also require discretion. Oh, trust me, Mara was in there giving him a lecture of the century for a while." Adriana looked around. "Where is she now?" "With another patient." Surprisingly, Inga's blue eyes darted to Eric for the briefest moment. "Yes." "Okay," Adriana nodded, dropping into one of the plush armchairs by the fire. "Then we shall wait most patiently." Eric took the other one silently, watching Inga as she returned to her workstation. If it wasn't for the slight pinch in his brow, Adriana might not have thought much of his silence. He wasn't chatty like Cliff or even Finn, who was more likely to make boring small talk just to fill up the silence. As it was, he was tense, the fingers of his left hand clamped on the chair. Confused, Adriana put her hand atop of his. A blink and the shadow in his eyes was gone and he faced her with a smile. She frowned. "Tried to hide something from her, did he?" The answer to her unspoken question came moments later, however, and she could almost see the wall of protection Eric snapped up between them, like the very air became charged. Footsteps echoed down the stairs, Mara speaking amicably to a young couple not much older than themselves. Melanie and Nicholas. Adriana blinked in surprise at the swell of the dark-haired girl's belly. She was pregnant. She knew the girl had had a miscarriage sometime last year, but she hadn't known she was expecting again. A quick glance at Eric answered her questions. He'd known and not told her. Not because she didn't need to know, but because he still refused to acknowledge that he even had another brother. Whose family was growing? Adriana felt the natural spark of excitement, regardless of her husband and brother-in-law's estrangement. A new life was a wonderful thing, and she'd always been excited at the prospect of a new child coming into the world, even when she was a little girl herself. So naturally, she smiled at them when they stepped off the stairs. Melanie drew up short, but after a moment of hesitation, she smiled back. Nicholas though. The glare he threw at them was dark and unwelcome. His gaze darted to her own belly and back up to her face, and the look he gave her made the smile melt off her face. Filthy. Unwanted. Weak. Eric was out of his chair in an instant, but Nicholas had already grabbed Melanie's hand and whisked her out of the house, grabbing their coats in the other hand. He didn't look back. But Melanie did. Her eyes were wide and sad as she stared back at Adriana before the door snapped to a close. Inga released a small sigh from her corner. Mara's lips were pursed as she approached them at last. Adriana. Would you like some tea or water? Eric crouched down and brushed her hair from her neck. It was then she realized her eyes were brewing with tears. No, she wiped her face and took a deep breath. I'm sorry, I'm all right. Do not, Eric said very quietly yet gently. Apologize for how he acts. Ever. Adriana nodded and took another deep breath. She hadn't felt that undesirable in a long time. She could forget sometimes how some people still didn't like or support her. Though Nicholas could very well use his estrangement from Eric as an excuse, he never had liked her. He'd always thought of her as small and useless. Well, that did not mean she had to hate him back. She could let it go, just as she had for every other jerk that had crossed her path. But she couldn't help but feel terribly for Melanie, her sister-in-law, who might have become a close friend if things had been different. A sister. The thought only made her sadder inside, but she pushed the thoughts away. She had an appointment. Okay, she stood and pulled a smile onto her face. Tomorrow, she said, let's do this. Once Adriana had followed Mara into one of the patient rooms for her checkup, Eric glared out the window. Originally he'd planned to go with her, hold her hand while Mara made sure everything was going well with the baby. But after that encounter, he couldn't. For once he wished Finn was here to wrestle with, blow off some steam. Cliff was out. Maybe Gustav was available later. All it had taken was a glance from Inga and he'd known his brother and sister-in-law were here. He'd wanted to grab Adriana's hand and run out before they appeared. He hadn't wanted any confrontation. Besides, she hadn't known that Melanie was pregnant. She was surely displeased now that she knew, and he'd never told her. Truly he'd only known since he returned from jet. Magnus and Gustav had mentioned Melanie's checkups in passing, and it hadn't taken a genius to figure it out. He knew they'd been trying for a child for a while now, and then she'd had the miscarriage last summer. He wondered if Gustav and Magnus had decided to drop those hints out of necessity or in the attempts to make them fix their relationship. Now that they both were about to be new fathers. But what relationship? Nicholas had never acted like he cared for anyone except their mother. He'd certainly never cared for Eric. He'd always been cruel and rude and stubborn. Things had gotten better when he'd met Melanie and gotten married. For a while he was actually pleasant. But he'd returned to his stoic, grumpy ways within a few months. Eric knew he cared for Melanie just as he cared for Adriana, he had no doubts there. He'd never hurt Mel. But when their father had died, it had only gotten worse. How about you, Larson? Inga's brash voice broke the silence, making him jump. Want some tea? You look tense as a board. Eric exhaled out his nose and turned from the window, arms crossed tight across his chest. I'm fine. Inga raised a brow. I'm going to need a shot of liquor before this day is over. He blinked. You're 14. There's a first time for everything. Eric shook his head, surrendering a laugh. Well, if you do, I had nothing to do with it. Are you kidding me? With all this stress? Yeah. Eric didn't want to hear it. He'd been looking forward to a nice day off with Adriana, and now Nicholas had to. Stop scowling, Inga said, brandishing a mixing spoon at him. Eric blinked. Adriana is a queen for shoving away those feelings the way she did. You and I both know that Nicholas deserved to have his lights knocked out for the way he looked at her, but she pushed it aside so she could move on with her day. Don't drag her down by being sullen and moody. Eric wanted to be stubborn and brood about it. What did she know anyway? She was just a kid. A smart kid though, wiser than her years. He huffed and forced himself to uncross his arms. All right. Inga squinted at him before nodding with an air of finality. Seriously, I should get a raise with all the Haddock and Larson drama I have to put up with. He laughed. Take it up with Mara. Might as well add Smedley's to the list. PFT, she'd probably do it too, what with her errant nephew, Eric said. He fought the temptation to search out his bestest bra. Will he be okay? Once we figure out which tonic works best, Inga said, measuring a cup of a briny white substance into a jar and screwing the lid. What's that for? Inga's hand stilled and she blushed. It's BHSTS. What? Eric asked, voice laced with laughter. It wasn't every day one got to see Inga blush. She huffed. It's bath salts, oh nosy one. Oh, Eric shrugged. My sisters loved bath salts growing up. That's not weird. Inga shoved the jar away, muttering under her breath about annoying men. Eric chuckled and plopped back into the armchair, stretching his legs out toward the fire. The orange light flickered across the metal of his prosthetic. So Inga said in a casual tone. Too casual. Have you heard from Finn? Eric hid a smile. Nope. I suspect he's busy training a dragon-riding army. Too busy to write. HM. He observed Inga's posture, wondering what she was thinking. He could read the girl surprisingly well in most cases, but with Finn, he wondered if she was still torn up about his rejection. She hadn't heard his name cross her lips in at least a month. It's quiet without him here, she said softly. Yeah, Eric agreed. Less to do around here without his daily patch-ups from whatever injury he acquired that day. Well, it's not like I miss him or anything. Eric barely restrained his scoff and covered his mouth with a hand. If she turned around she might see his struggle, but mercifully, her back stayed turned. Like I said, it's just quiet, Inga added, the mixing of salts in her bowl getting louder. He'd be surprised if they wouldn't be called bath powder soon. I keep expecting him to walk by or hear him in the Great Hall or goofing around with Zap somewhere. It's just weird. She totally missed him. Eric and Adriana had wondered for some time if Inga still liked him. Without having Finn around for a few weeks now and Inga hadn't spoken to him since before the wedding, it had been difficult to figure out. Finn's love life had become one of Adriana's favorite topics of discussion since he'd returned from jet. For the first few days it had been Genevieve this and Genevieve that. He honestly couldn't wait for the girls to meet, for he had no doubts that they would be fast friends. There was something there, Finn and Genevieve. Eric had seen the spark. Hiccup had seen it too, he'd known by the way his father-in-law's eyes had lit up mischievously. He'd had to tell Hiccup not to go crazy on the flight home and let it run its course in due time. Eric would be lying if he said he wasn't crossing his own fingers though. He'd never been one to play matchmaker, but since the wedding, he and Adriana had spent a copious amount of time discussing people and their potentials for dates. Morgan and Evan had even made the list. His amused smile fell when he remembered the young girl standing a few feet away. What would Inga think if Finn started going out with someone else? Oh, he'd have to ask Adriana about that. It would be one thing if Inga had moved on, but the girl was clearly in denial at missing Finn. Deep down, she still liked him. All I'm saying is Burke isn't the same without him, that's all. Inga added abruptly. Yup. She still liked him. Eric swallowed, trying his best to sound casual. Well, he'll be back in time for Snoggletalk. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until his birthday when he'd turn 19. Things had changed so much in the last year and things would continue to change. They'd be having a baby in 2 months, hopefully they'd build a new house in the spring and move in by summer, and. A grin spread across his face. And then life would carry on, a blank slate for the future. Genevieve wrung her hands together, staring at her parents doing the dishes in the kitchen. Her dad stole the scrub brush, her mom yelped and splattered him with soapy water, coating his beard. They laughed. She stared, terrified. She'd always been close with her parents, though she did butt heads with her mother sometimes. Her mother was no-nonsense and logical, Genevieve was wild and free-spirited. Try as she might, it had been hard grooming Genevieve into the good girl she was today. She'd been obedient and compliant over the years, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But that made it difficult for her to ask for things. Or just ask things. Almost like she was walking over some invisible line that existed between her and her parents. That asking for something was wrong by nature. There was only obedience, no questions asked. That's what it felt like sometimes. Being stifled and guarded. Overprotected. Nervousness about stepping over the line clawed up her throat. Talk to them, she chided herself. They're your parents, just ask them. But what if they get angry? They love you. Tell them the reasons why you want to train. Honesty is more valuable. They'll be disappointed. That's not the future they wanted for me. Around and around the thoughts swirled in her brain. And they had been since she'd talked to Finn on Tuesday night. It was now Friday morning. Between her fear and the various duties they were all accustomed to, she hadn't had much of a chance to speak to either of them the last few days. But now she was almost out of time. Panic clawed up her throat and she tiptoed back up the stairs before they noticed her presence. Overwhelmed, she walked into her room and sighed, rubbing her face. She really shouldn't be getting so worked up about it. She should just come right out and ask, not make a spectacle of it. She didn't need to start a false conversation and segue into what she really wanted. But the thought of any variety of responses they'd have, it terrified her, crippled her, kept her from making a decision. She didn't know what to do. The ceiling creaked above her and her thoughts evaporated. She paused, listening. Moments later, she heard it again. If she was hearing footsteps, that meant Finn was still here. She'd gotten up early to give herself extra time, but she'd assumed that he'd be gone by now. Apparently he didn't get up at the crack of dawn every day. Or maybe his non-stop working for nearly 2 weeks straight was finally starting to catch up to him. Resolve filled her and she left her room, taking the stairs to the loft. She marched up to the door and knocked before she lost her nerve. She had to talk to someone or she'd combust and go crazy. Just what she needed was an emotional breakdown, and then she'd be stuck in the elders' home for the rest of her life for losing her mind. The door opened to reveal Finn, bare from the waist up except for the Fortis necklace. Genevieve's mind went blank, torn between shock and embarrassment. She hadn't been imagining the muscles of his chest and stomach on that flight. With the sparse red hair on his broad chest, she tried to avert her eyes and instead caught sight of a thin yet ugly horizontal scar just below his ribs. He smirked, leaning against the doorframe. We've really got to stop running into each other like this. Huh? Genevieve forced her eyes up and his smirk broadened. She swallowed hard and averted her eyes, even as her face flushed. The only way she couldn't look at him was to either look straight up or straight down. He wasn't naked, for God's sake, she should calm down, but really, why did she have to put herself into these positions? I haven't seen you shirtless before. I can come back later. She added hastily. He laughed and opened the door wider. I'm just messing with you. Come in, General. I'm sorry, I just wanted to talk to you. I didn't mean to barge in. She said as he turned to the bed, sifting through a small pile of freshly laundered clothes, presumably in search of a shirt. No problem. She chewed her lip, glancing around the room, trying to focus on anything but him. The room wasn't very large though, and he seemed to be taking his sweet time looking for a shirt. Genevieve glared at his back. If she discovered that he was stalling just to make her squirm, she'd. Genevieve blinked. His back was just as muscled as the rest of him, covered in freckles and tan from long summer days in the sun. But it was the series of crossed stripes along his spine that halted her breath in her lungs. Scars. Genevieve halted the gasp that almost surged out of her mouth and dragged her gaze away. Finn is a man of secrets, Helga's voice rang through her mind. Whatever those secrets entailed, Genevieve doubted that Helga knew where the scars had come from. She added this piece of knowledge to everything she'd learned so far. That Finn had left Berk and gone on some adventure, seen and perhaps done things that most people did not know about, even his closest friends. Even some of his family. He himself had told her that he'd seen enough of the world to know that he belonged on Berk, as future chief. That he wouldn't give that up to satisfy mere wanderlust. She wondered if that's what had happened. If he'd left Berk and discovered that the world didn't satisfy, that Berk was his one and only true home. But how did he get those scars? Horror crawled up her throat. What if he'd left home because? But no, she'd met his family, it certainly wasn't abuse from anyone in his household. Well, not his immediate family anyway. She supposed that she'd never heard of any extended family members. She was overthinking it. She had to be. Either way, Genevieve knew she didn't have the guts to ask, and even if she did, she knew she'd be crossing some line. No one would want to be asked such a prying question. He wouldn't even have to use their new code word frostbite, and she had a feeling that asking would be detrimental to their new, growing friendship. Still, what sort of horrors had he been through for his skin to be marred by such scars? Finn looped his arms through a grey shirt and laughed. Relax, I'm almost decent. He'd interpreted her fearful, tense look as afraid of his half-naked body. Sure, she wasn't used to that, but she wasn't about to admit that she'd seen the scars, afraid of how he might respond. Gulping, Genevieve watched as he pulled the shirt over his head and straightened it over that muscled abdomen. She was acting weird and needed to say something or he'd get suspicious. Lying had never been her strong suit. She was too good of a girl for that, and while it might make her a coward, she did not want to ask about the scars. So without thinking, she said, "It was a nice change of scenery." "Gods, take me now." Eyes narrowing in amusement, Finn crossed arms. "Is that so?" Genevieve wrung her hands. Of all the things she had to say, and now he was looking at her with a playful look, blue eyes dancing. Her rising stress prevented her from thinking of another snappy comeback. Maybe that was a good thing. Her anxiousness must have shown on her face because Finn's amusement slipped away. "What's wrong?" She felt crazy, but a small laugh escaped her. "What's wrong?" Grabbing a chair, she dropped into it with a huff. "What's wrong is that Max is going to be freed today and I still haven't talked to my parents." Finn pursed his lips. "Well, I hate to be frank, but there's only one way to fix that." Genevieve shoved her hands into her hair. A sharp pain appeared at both her hands and her neck as the pendant of her necklace got caught in her hands and lodged itself in her hair. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I'm terrified. As much as I might want to be, Finn, I'm not like you. I'm not wild and crazy and fearless. Every time I see them, every time I start to say something, the words disappear and I don't know what to say." She slumped, not caring if she looked dramatic or ridiculous or uncouth. Finn said nothing for a long minute. Then, he said softly, "I can't do it for you, General. I know you see me as wild and carefree, but I've always had a big mouth and have never had a problem saying what's on my mind." He sighed. "I wish Adriana was here to help you." Genevieve looked up at him through her bush of curls. "Really?" He smoothed out a wrinkle in his shirt, the leather cord of his necklace peeking out at his collarbone. She tried not think of what he looked like without that shirt on mere moments before. As he said, she'd probably know what to say. Or heck, she'd hold your hand and go with you for moral support. She heard the unspoken words, she wouldn't get that luxury with him. Finn seemed to catch himself. "Not that I wouldn't go, I just don't want to get us both into trouble." "Ugh, and that makes me sound like I'm trying to save my own skin." "It's all right," Genevieve said, removing her hand from her hair and hissing in pain at the necklace still caught in her tresses. Sometimes she could just curse her curly hair. Today was not her day for patience, she realized, so she took a long breath before she lost it completely and yanked it out with all the strength she could muster. That would just look ridiculous and childish, not to mention exceedingly painful. She blinked in surprise when Finn knelt and placed a hand on her wrist. "Let me," Finn said, inspecting the tightly wound strands wrapped around the pendant. "God's woman, what did you do?" A smile tugged at her lips as he tried to figure out the tangled mass of curls to save the necklace. If anyone were to walk in right now, they'd be concerned at the sight of fearless Finn's hands deep in her hair, though they weren't even nose to nose. Still, she had to ignore the tingles that shot across her skin when his calloused fingers gently pulled, twisted and unbound the trapped hair. She couldn't let him see just what it did to her to have him this close. She wasn't sure if she should be annoyed or grateful that it took him a few minutes to unravel it all. Not with him, but at her stupidity. But she couldn't deny that watching him concentrate on this small, trivial task was entertaining. His mouth narrowed to a thin line when he was this concentrated, blue gaze focused. Almost as if this little thing was the most important thing to him in that moment. But that's the expression he wore whenever he was focused. She'd seen it when training the men or talking with people. Whatever he was focused on, nothing else mattered. He didn't get distracted easily. Almost there, he murmured, holding the chain up and pulling a long curl out of the loops. She had to hide the sharp inhale of surprise when his knuckles brushed the back of her neck. His blue eyes flicked to hers, but his expression didn't change. Maybe he hadn't noticed. Of course she hadn't chosen simple jewelry today. It had to be the bird flying over the waves, ensconced in a metal circle. It had always been her favorite. She'd always liked to imagine that she was that little bird, gazing at the horizon across the sea, waiting for the day when she could spread her wings. Well, that day had come. It was almost over. And what was she doing? Sulking. Embarrassment and irritation flared in her chest. There we go, Finn murmured, releasing the necklace so it dropped to her collarbone. I'd highly recommend against doing that again. Genevieve giggled and touched the small pendant. Thank you. You're welcome, he said. He remained kneeling in front of her, his lips still a thin line. What? Genevieve asked. You know I can hold off on releasing Maximum. Her heart lurched. No. No. It has to happen today. Finn winced. Jen. No, I mean it, Genevieve said firmly. We can't keep him locked up forever. Certainly not until the day that I decide is the right time. Finn raised a brow, hearing the resolve in her voice. Genevieve steeled herself. It's now or never. I've waited for something like this for so long, and when I finally get the chance, I'm going to let it pass me by. That's unacceptable. Well, there are other dragons. There's no one like Maximum. Finn scoffed, finally coming to stand. Well, you've got that right. His sweet Genevieve stood as well, feeling defensive. I'll prove to my parents and the village and even you and your father that he's not some savage beast, that he can be just as docile and peaceful as the Night Fury that your father trained. Great. Finn said, marching toward the door. She blinked in surprise as he opened it and waved her out. Then let's get started. Why wait? Genevieve's heart thudded in her chest, but she straightened her spine. She could do this. She would do this. For Maximum. For herself. Leaving the loft, Finn grabbed a coat and followed her down the stairs, their footsteps echoing. Even though her nerves surged once more, she didn't slow her pace and raised her chin. It was now or never. Mom, Dad, she said, marching into the kitchen where they were putting the last of the dishes away. I have to ask you something. Kiev's brows lifted at the sight of Finn at her heels. You're leaving late today. I was out late. Finn said, glancing at Genevieve. She saw the flash of encouragement in his eyes and she took a steadying breath. Molly dried her hands on a towel. What is it? Be quick now, I'm running late for a baby shower, which I expect you to attend, by the way. A flash of annoyance rose, but Genevieve choked it down. I've been thinking that with all the things I do every day, while I don't dislike doing them, I'm finding that I want to do more with my time than just helping others with their various needs. I'm not doing anything for myself. Her father frowned, but not negatively. Listening. Her mother's brows rose. Waiting. Genevieve glanced at Finn, standing still as a statue beside her. Calm. She exhaled. With your permission, I want to train the shockjaw. There. She said it. Her parents stared and the house was silent for nearly a minute. Then Molly's eyes snapped to Finn. Have you been giving her lessons? No. Finn said. Then why is she suddenly so bent on training that dragon? Genevieve clamped her hands behind her back, trying not to let her rising frustration show. Not only did her mother instantly go on the defensive to Finn, but she also talked about her as if she wasn't standing right here, as if she hadn't been the one to bring it up. With all due respect, Finn said. This is something that she's been curious about since before I got here. Yes, and I've been trying to stamp it out, Molly said fiercely. She turned to Genevieve. This is not what you trained me for? Genevieve asked. Cooking, knitting, singing, and eventually breeding. What if I want more out of life? Kiev's brows shot up and he inhaled as if he'd speak, though he didn't look angry. Just surprised. Molly cut him off. Do not speak to me that way, Genevieve. People are looking to us as the leaders. When your brother started this dragon training business I was skeptical, but I was able to be convinced of its usefulness. Having the haddocks train the men has been useful. But it was decided that the women remain on the ground, as it should be. Decided? Or not considered? Genevieve asked. It is not our way, Molly replied. Molly, Kiev said. Don't you start. Molly's eyes flashed. Genevieve will not be training any dragons, and she is not going to get her way by being coddled like a child. Hurt flashed in Genevieve's chest. Finn stiffened, but he remained silent. I'm not a child, Genevieve bit out. Nor am I acting like one. Is it so much to ask for something for once? What if I just decided to train him without your permission? Kiev's gaze sharpened. That would be ill-advised. Then let me be myself for once. Genevieve cried. I don't want to spend my life doing what every other woman is doing. It's monotonous and I'm tired. Tired? Molly exclaimed. You, Genevieve, don't know what tired is. Until you've married and raised children of your own, you will not understand what tired is. If you marry an eligible heir and someday become a chief's wife yourself, then you will understand what tired is. Stop belittling me. Genevieve said, her eyes beginning to burn. She had not known what her parents would say, but she didn't expect this from her mother. Or almost nothing from her father. Enough. Molly exclaimed. You will go to your lessons, you will help in the elders' home. Molly, Kiev said, but went ignored. You will finish your tapestry that will be presented to your betrothed when the time comes, and you will not be returning to that arena. A dragon rider is not what I've been raising all these years, and we are certainly not going to be starting now. Tears welling up, Genevieve fought to breath. The pain and unfairness built in her chest. And you, Molly whirled to Finn. Sniffing, Genevieve looked up to see his face blotchy. She'd never seen him angry before, but his jaw was quivering. Get rid of that shock jaw. It doesn't want a rider. Then free it and let it be finished. Finn exhaled slowly. His hands were shaking at his sides. He worked his jaw for a minute before turning and leaving, clearly not trusting himself to speak. The door closed and Genevieve closed her eyes, the tears finally slipping down her face. She wouldn't even get to say goodbye to Maximum. I'm very disappointed in you, Molly said in a low voice. Molly, that is quite enough. Kiev said, anger finally lacing his voice. You did not need to say any of those things in front of Finn. It's all right, Genevieve sniffed, wiping her face and turning to the stairs. It's good to know what she really thinks of me. What I really think. Molly cried, charging after her up the stairs. Kiev blocked the way, which Genevieve felt a flash of thankfulness for as she continued up the stairs. I've been proud of your accomplishments. Accomplishments? Genevieve shouted, whirling to face her parents. They both blinked at her in surprise. What accomplishments? I've done nothing with my life. I do whatever I'm asked to do without giving myself any thought. I'm not trying to be selfish. But I give and I give and I give, and for once, I'm sick of giving. I want to be free to do something with my time and energy. I want to have the freedom to learn new things, whatever that entails, without being guilt-tripped or yelled at or being told what a disappointment I am, especially when all I've ever done is what you both have wanted. Genevieve, sweetheart. Kiev released Molly and started up the stairs. Genevieve shook her head and ran to her room, locking the door. She heard her parents' muffled argument from the downstairs even as she collapsed to her bed. Sobs broke from her in heaves, tears soaking her pillow. She knew that talking to them wouldn't work. She'd tried. Gods, she'd tried. But in the end, she wasn't good enough. She'd never see Max again. She'd never fly again. Her mother would likely begin the search for a future husband now that Genevieve had made her request and had thoroughly been shot down. It didn't matter. If Genevieve was such a disappointment for blindly obeying her entire life, the only sign of her indifference being her insatiable curiosity, then what was the point anymore? She still wanted to be a good daughter. She didn't want to rebel and cause enmity with her parents. But it was now or never. Either things had to change now or she'd have to obey once more. Comply once more. Yield all her hopes and dreams and wanderlust and submit. Anger kindled in her chest and she sat up abruptly, scrubbing her face. There was still time. She could still see Max off, at least try to say goodbye. If she ran fast enough she could make it. She glared down at her dress. This will not do. People must have known that he was ticked because no one stopped him as he stomped to the arena. Zap was nowhere to be found, so it had been a walk through the busy village. Finn was glad for the cold air blowing off the ocean. His face was still burning with anger. It had taken every ounce of willpower to not speak up, to defend Genevieve. It had been his father's voice to not get involved that had steeled his tongue. Still, he couldn't control his emotions into a cool mask like Eric. He found himself wishing to be his brother-in-law for the second time that week, if not for a moment, so he could calm the rage pounding through his veins so that the people around him would be none the wiser. The things Molly had said to Genevieve. Finn understood, he really did. From Molly's point of view, tradition came first. It reminded him of the story of his Poppy's reaction to his dad's training Toothless all those years ago. The pain of discovering your son or daughter doing the very opposite of what tradition dictated, it was crippling and painful. It probably felt a lot like betrayal. But like his Poppy, that did not excuse any parent from saying or doing something rash. There were still lines, even with children. Especially when those children were practically adults. Finn didn't know the first thing about parenting, but he did hate the idea of someone being locked up, and right now, Genevieve felt like a little bird trapped in a cage in the back of a dungeon, never to fly free. With a growl Finn kicked a bucket of weapons that rattled, the sound echoing through the arena. A handful of trainees gawked and quickly averted their eyes. No training today. Out. Finn snapped, stalking to the Shockjaw's open door. The beast was curled up on his side and blinked lazily at Finn as he halted, crossing his arms. Finn waited, huffing darkly as the trainees made themselves scarce. Finn stared at the Shockjaw Max, he reminded himself as the arena finally went silent. Why couldn't you have just cooperated? Picked a trainee to work with. Why Genevieve? Max perked up at the name, looking toward the door as if expecting her to walk through. He cooed in question. No, she won't be coming today. Or ever again. Thanks to Finn cut off his dark muttering, in case someone was listening. He huffed and shoved his hands through his hair, willing himself to calm down. Now was not the time to lose his head. Still, he wished his parents were here. They were so level-headed and calm, they could have helped talk Molly down, convince her that it wasn't a bad thing for Genevieve to train a dragon. His mom would have been a good advocate. No, instead she had Finn, who just stood there, biting his tongue. As if opening his big mouth would have helped. If anything, it probably would have gotten him kicked off the island and sent home with his tail tucked between his legs. He exhaled slowly and dropped his hands. Max was watching him silently. Finn wanted to make Genevieve happy, he didn't want to do this, but what else could he do? It's not like he could tell Genevieve to get on Max's back and fly off into the sunset. He knew exactly what happened when kids ran away from home, bitter and reckless and unafraid. Gritting his teeth, Finn stepped aside. Come on. Max stood and walked to the center of the arena with him. Finn knew the dragon still didn't like him very much. He'd still yet to touch him, save for the first few initial days when they'd fought. The dragon tolerated the occasional poke or prod. But they hadn't bonded. Still, it was with a heavy heart that he realized Max followed him without complaint. They'd made progress after all this time. The Shockjaw stopped in the middle, confused when Finn halted, continued to the open portcullis. He jerked his head forward. Come on. Max blinked before slowly following, matching Finn's steps as they exited the arena. He lifted his head and sniffed the air, warbling deeply. The ocean stretched out before them, the scent of sea salt in the air. Max gazed toward the village in search of someone. "She's not coming," Finn said. "She's not allowed to see you anymore." A low croon rumbled in Max's chest and Finn withheld a sigh. "You haven't chosen a rider. I've tried everything, shown you every trainee on the island twice. I've tried training you myself. Heck, you barely tolerated my dad, who's the Dragon Master, whom every dragon in the archipelago loves." Finn released the pent-up sigh. "And out of all of them, you fall for the curious, gentle, curly-haired girl that loves art and music." Max looked at him then with an open gaze Finn had only seen once. When Genevieve pet him for the first time. This dragon did not deserve to be here any longer. If Molly and Kiev would not allow Genevieve to train him, the only person whom he'd chosen, then it was just as well that Molly forced him to let Max go. Today had been the deadline anyway. He couldn't stand the thought of keeping him in captivity against his will any longer. It was time. Finn gazed at the ocean, heart twisting in his chest. "You're free to go." The shockjaw should have leapt to the skies. He'd wanted to be free for weeks. He could fly and hunt and find other shockjaws, perhaps find the pod he'd been separated from. He could live the rest of his life away from humans. Yet he remained staring at the village. Waiting. Finn pushed past the annoyance in his chest. Annoyance at this whole situation, that he had to be put in this position. He felt like he was betraying Genevieve, even though he was ultimately doing what she'd asked. He shoved himself in front of Max's line of sight and threw up his arms, startling the shockjaw. Max jumped back. "Go on, get out of here. You don't belong here, you don't really want to be here. Just go." Max warbled, his croon so deep compared to Zap's. "Go." Finn waved at him again, hating himself for it. What would he do if Max wouldn't leave? A flicker of stubbornness rose in his chest and he stamped it down. The shockjaw warbled sadly, looking toward the village. Searching the crowds for blonde curly hair. He came up empty. He lowered his head sadly. Finn sighed. "I'm sorry. I really am." Max stood in place for nearly a minute before he straightened, rustling his wings. His gaze hardened as stared at Finn for a few moments before snorting. His deep blue wings rose and fell, buffeting the wind as he rose into the air and at last flew off. The wind tussling his hair, Finn watched him go, a dark blot swooping into the distance, angling with the wind. Strangely, even though the dragon had almost tried to kill him a few weeks ago, he felt like a piece of him was leaving. Soon enough, he disappeared into the distance. Finn slid to the ground against the cold stone wall that stole the warmth from his body. It wasn't 9 in the morning and he already needed a strong drink. 10 minutes later, the crunch of gravel under running boots caught his attention. He glanced up to see Genevieve skid around the corner, panting and blonde curls flying. She planted her hands on either side of the arena entrance, staring inside with hope in her eyes. He wasn't at all surprised to see her so soon. He'd expected her to try to sneak out and see Max again before he was released. What he did not expect to see was Genevieve wearing a pair of brown trousers. It took him a moment to stop staring. Dragging his gaze away from the curves she'd apparently been hiding under all those luminous dresses and skirts, he swallowed hard. Gods, now was not the time to notice these things. Where is he? Finn rubbed his face. Gone. Genevieve whirled on him. Which way did he go? Angling his face up to meet her blotchy face, he said, "I have no idea." Her face reddened. "Finn, don't." "What?" Finn uncurled to his feet and met her fierce gaze. "Don't what?" "Don't lie to me." "Which way did he go?" "Genevieve, it's a dragon. He could be anywhere by now. Did you even try to wait for me?" Finn fought to control the anger rapidly surging in his chest. "I was given an order. I followed it. And before you get any crazy ideas, no, you're not walking into the wilderness to find him, because what would you do next? Train him without your parents knowing about it? Do they even know you're out of the house?" "No, her voice hitched and she covered her eyes with her palms. "I just wanted to say goodbye." His anger and frustration ebbed away. He wasn't upset with her after all. "I know. If you'd been here though, I don't think he would have left. She sniffed and dropped her hands. He was glad she'd at least thought to bring gloves this time. I told you they wouldn't listen. Finn saw the way her shoulders curled inward. He considered the wisdom of giving her a hug with all the propriety and circumstances of her parents already being upset with her. But he pushed those thoughts away quickly. Let the villagers gasp or scoff or tattletale. There was nothing wrong with him giving her a comforting hug. And gods knew there were times that was all he wanted in the midst of a crappy day. Gesturing forward with his hands, he gently said, "Come here." Genevieve stared at him for a moment. He saw the tears welling up in her eyes once more until finally she stepped into his embrace, burying her face in his shoulder. He kept the embrace loose so she could pull away easily but gently rubbed her upper back in what he hoped was soothing. She didn't seem to be a dramatic crier but he could feel the tension in her body from the shuddering sobs she kept a tight lid on. "She called me a disappointment," she whispered hoarsely. "Don't you believe that for a second," Finn replied, pulling away enough to brush the tears off her face with his thumbs. Another inch and his forehead would be resting on hers. A little bell rang in the back of his mind to step back or anyone watching might think this more than just a comforting hug. He ignored said little bell and brushed a curl off her cheek. Just because you're doing something different than what she has planned does not make you a disappointment. She will have to come to terms with the fact that you are different than all the other daughters she raised. You're different than she was. That's not a bad thing and it shouldn't be a disappointment. It's just different. Genevieve wiped her face, her voice still thick with emotion. Acting like a baby, she muttered. No. Finn gave her a small smile. You take pride in the things you do and want validation from those you love most. It's perfectly normal to get upset when your parents have high expectations and don't respond in the best way. And that's putting it nicely. A choked laugh escaped her and she gave him a small glare. I do think that was the first time I've seen you angry. Finn looked askance for a moment, hoping she'd never see the day. That was nothing. Just an abundance of self-control in the sight of injustice. Now I understand why my dad told me to stay out of it. He's smart. Very. Finn sighed, at last dropping his arms from the embrace. He gave her a wan smile. You're going to be okay, General. Genevieve took a deep breath. Thank you. I'm sorry about all this nonsense. I suppose I should just move on. Finn shrugged. Maybe you don't have to. Maybe it will just take more time with the women. And before you say that will never happen, he grinned when her mouth closed just as quickly as it had opened. Give it time. Be patient but don't just lie down and give up. Still, Genevieve said. Max is one of a kind, wouldn't you say? No other dragon would be quite like him. Finn sighed, the wind snatching the puff of air away in seconds. Well, if it takes time for you to bond with a new dragon, by then hopefully it won't send the shockjaw on you. His name is... He doesn't have a name, Finn said quietly. You won't ever be able to let him go if you insist on the name. Genevieve's lips thinned to a small line before she conceded a brief nod. He hated to say it but it was true. She had to move on in that respect. She swallowed hard. Have you ever done it? What? Let a dragon go free? His gaze snagged on a torrent of memories of Tornado, that mighty dragon who was friend and ally to the great stoic, the vast with shimmering blue scales and a roar so loud it threatened to rupture his eardrums. He remembered the very first flight he'd ever taken. It hadn't been with either of his parents on Toothless or Stormfly. No, it had been with his Poppy and Tornado, miles in the sky with the clouds as the roof and the ocean carpeting the world below. A feeling of loss and regret filled him as he remembered the last adventure he'd had with that fierce thunder drum. To the ache in his chest that wasn't dulled by anything for days after he'd bid Tornado goodbye and watched him disappear into the endless horizon. Finn. He blinked and found Genevieve staring at him, concern in her brown eyes. Yes. He deserved to be free. Why did you release him? He wanted to go. He was getting a bit old and cranky. Finn smiled in amusement, looking toward the ocean to avoid meeting her gaze. He should have known that the minimal response wouldn't satisfy her curiosity. What was his name? Tornado. Genevieve's eyes narrowed in recognition. Wasn't that your grandfather's dragon when he was chief? Finn stared. How did you know that? Johann doesn't spare on the details. He laughed. No, he doesn't. Genevieve smiled in amusement, but it quickly faded. After all that time in your family's life, why did he want to leave? Finn pursed his lips. He considered the story, his past. Frostbite? Genevieve asked with a wince. No, Finn rubbed his neck. Certain elements, yes, but he wasn't about to tell her that. The code word might give her pause in a conversation, but it would still alert her to a touchy subject that would still heighten her curiosity. He sighed and dropped his hand. So a few years ago, I hit a bit of a rebellious patch. Long story short, I left Burke for about a week. After dragging him across the archipelago, Tornado had had enough, I think. So I gave him the option of staying or going. He decided to go. He kicked a few pebbles out from beneath his boots, avoiding her eyes once again. It was hard and painful, but it was on that same trip that I saved Zack from the net. Genevieve's brows rose with interest. She tracked me to Burke and here we are. Genevieve nodded. And she didn't mind that you'd already been bonded to a dragon. Some dragons are more territorial. Tornado was Finn shrugged. Zack wasn't even a year old yet, so I don't think she cared. Interesting. Genevieve mused. So on your trip away from Burke, where did you go? Finn gave her a small smile. Frostbite. Oh come on. Laughing, Finn shook out his arms to warm them up. Sorry. Anyway, his gaze flicked down to the pants she wore, eager for a change in the subject. I didn't expect to see those, like ever. How do they feel? Genevieve huffed a laugh. They are very warm. Fleece-lined. I was feeling a little rebellious. Well, Finn smirked, pleased at this rising opportunity. They're a nice change of scenery. Oh gods, Genevieve gasped, covering her face with a hand. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Genevieve rolled her eyes and gazed at the sea, amusement morphing to sadness. Do you think he'll be all right? Yes, Finn said. She looked so crestfallen, he resisted the urge to take her hand. This may not be a completely comforting thought, but who knows? In time maybe your mom will loosen up and you can train someone else. It wouldn't be the same, but I imagine it's similar to having kids. It's not the same, just different. She looked up at him with a slight twinkle in her eyes. And what do you know about having kids? A mixture of amusement and embarrassment forced him to look away, an awkward laugh escaping him. And here I thought I was being all smart and... Her elbow knocked into his and she grinned. I'm just messing with ya. This girl, Finn thought, remembering he'd said the same thing to her a mere hour before at the loft. It already felt so long ago that they'd spoken up there. She'd had a bit of a rough morning so far, but at least she was smiling now. He thought back to fishing the necklace out of her hair and the way her breath had hitched when his fingers had brushed her nape. That personality combined with the curves and curls, he couldn't help the thrill in his chest whenever she smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. For a brief moment, he wondered what she really thought of him. If she maybe thought of him the same way he thought of her. In the few weeks he'd been here, the interest and curiosity hadn't waned. She was still just as fun and intriguing as when he'd first met her at Adriana and Eric's wedding. She always asked him questions, obviously to get to know him better. It was time he returned the favor. Finn gestured toward a well-worn path that curved around the arena that he knew led to the distant woods. Walk with me. Genevieve looked askance at the arena. Don't you have training today? I might have dismissed them. She gave him a knowing smile. I came prepared for the elements today, she said, raising her gloved hands. Good, he said, ushering her toward the path. I have to admit that I've been looking forward to our second date. Genevieve halted in her tracks, staring up at him in surprise. Then she scoffed and slapped his arm at the smirk she found waiting on his face. You are insufferable. Oh, so we're pointing out the obvious today, all right, Finn said, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. You're beautiful. Please, Genevieve scoffed again, though her face tinged pink. I don't think. And your singing is gorgeous. Finn. Hush, I'm on a roll, you might not get a compliment from me in a long time. I'm not one for compliments. He cleared his throat and continued, ignoring her laugh. And I have to say that if I had to choose, I'd definitely pick pants over dresses. Oh, you little Genevieve made to shove him, and Finn danced away, laughing. Come on, Jen, Finn said, skittering up the path backwards. Let's see what those legs can do. Genevieve lunged and he turned on his heel, charging up the path. Branches and overgrown bushes tore at his clothes as he ran, the trees overhead indeed providing a brief respite from the wind. Combined with the overcast day, the shadows were thick beneath the foliage. A few times he nearly tripped on a rock or tree branch, but as always he dodged, leaped and bounded over the inconsistencies in the ground. It occurred to him that maybe he shouldn't risk Genevieve twisting an ankle when he heard her panting close behind. A quick glance over his shoulder and he gaped. She was right on his heels. What the Finn sped up around and had to duck halfway to keep from getting his face slapped by a bare branch. Genevieve tore past him, cackling. Keep up, slowpoke. Who are you calling a slowpoke? Finn demanded, matching her stride. It took you eons to catch up. And now you're slowing down, Genevieve said, eyes glittering. Maybe you should take Helga's advice and lose a leg after all. It might make you faster. Finn scoffed. Have you ever seen a one-legged man run? It's not as easy as it looks. Perhaps, but then you can use your prosthetic as a weapon and chuck it at the back of the winner's head. Guffawing, Finn allowed her to pull ahead. That would be called cheating. It wouldn't be cheating if the amputee then leaped over the finish line before the other could recover. It would still be cheating. Not if you win. God's woman, cheaters never prosper. Neither do losers. Are you getting tired back there? Flakes of mud splattered his shirt as she pushed herself harder, gaining distance between them. Finn stared after her, torn between shock and amazement. Then he shook his head. He was being beaten by a girl, the only girl to date who'd ever done so was Helga. She would not be pleased. He had to admit that he was merely impressed. And perhaps a bit turned on. Shoving that thought away, Finn surged forward, trying to catch up. He was panting hard now, not having run like this since before the first snows had come. It was difficult to run in the winter with the invisible patches of ice and the brisk air turning one's breath to shards of glass in their lungs. Right now, though, in the deepest reaches of the Jatan forest, Finn easily forget the potential for accidents. How far they ran, he didn't know. 1 mile. 2. Hell, maybe it was 3. Eventually they slowed to a gentler jog and a slow walk, both of them panting and flushed from exertion. Genevieve pushed aside a few bushes and Finn followed, then turned in a circle. Few, recognize this spot. It's near the cliff, Genevieve said, pulling off her gloves already and shoving them into a pocket. Indeed, within a few minutes the clearing emerged with the large cliff. Finn remembered how just a week ago she'd joined him on Zap's back and she'd taken her first flight. She didn't mention it though as she collapsed on the large boulder with a sigh. I haven't run like that in. I don't even know how long it's been. Finn unbuttoned his coat and yanked up his shirt to roughly wipe his face. You're telling me? You never cease to amaze me, you know that. Genevieve batted an hand at him, too exhausted to do much else. You don't have to keep up with the compliments. I mean it, Finn said, dropping to the boulder beside her. She peered up at him in surprise. You're not like most girls. And how are most girls, Finn? Genevieve asked, wagging her fingers to enclose the particular words. Most Burkean girls are, well, dragon riders. They're tough and competitive and no nonsense. Like Helga. Exactly like Helga, Finn sighed, laying back beside her. Now he was grateful for the cold wind on his sweaty face. He felt her gaze on his face as he added, I don't mind it. I'm so blunt most of the time that I appreciate it. But I'm a lot more emotional than I give myself credit for sometimes. You don't seem emotional. Genevieve turned on her side, leaning her head on a fist. You seem very no-nonsense and level-headed. Finn gave her a wry smile. You haven't really had a chance to see me emotional yet. We were close this morning but I kept a lid on it. Genevieve's smile waned but she focused on his words. So what is it about me that's so different? Everything. Finn debated telling her, thought about how he might put it into words, when a series of booms caught his attention. He frowned. What is that? Genevieve's brows rose. I don't hear anything. Finn sat up, listening. For a moment only the sound of their breathing and leaves blowing in the wind could be heard. Then he heard it again. Boom, boom, boom. Genevieve frowned and sat up beside him. I hear it. What? Finn held up a hand. Squinting, he picked out a series of dots on the horizon. Hopping off the boulder, he said, Wingbits. Someone's coming. Was your father coming to check on your progress? If he is, he didn't tell me about it. Ah, well that's nothing to worry about, Genevieve said. A heads up is usually appreciated, but it's no trouble. Finn frowned, wishing he had his eyeglass. The dragons emerged more clearly in the distance and he didn't recognize any of them. It certainly wasn't Toothless or Stormfly leading the pack. And they were traveling fast. Too fast. What the hell, Finn muttered, stalking toward the edge of the cliff. Genevieve clambered off the rock after him. Finn, be careful. Then he saw the leading rider lift something high over his head. Something long and thin, a sword. Heart galloping in realization, Finn watched as they neared Jut. As they got closer and closer to the village at rapid speeds, the other 30 riders lifted bows and arrows. Their dragons' maws opened and fire and smoke rippled past as they prepared to fire. No! Finn shouted. The Jutans weren't ready, they weren't ready. The sword fell. Arrows and bolts of white-hot fire spewed from the riders and rained down on the Jutan village. Buildings shook and wood sprayed. Trees were engulfed in flames. And that's when the screaming began. Genevieve grabbed Finn by the lapels, shaking him. It's them. That's the people who raided us before. They watched as the group of riders split in half, one shooting to the businesses and market, the other firing on the village itself. The homes where people lived and were likely trapped inside. The elder's home stood like a beacon, wreathed in smoke beside a home that was already engulfed in flames. Finn snapped. Not on my watch. You stay here. Genevieve clutched his arm before he could make 2 steps. No, I can help. What do you want? I want you to stay here where it's safe from that chaos. Finn shouted, the screams of the village filling his ears. He had to get down there. Now. Stay here, Genevieve. Ripping his arm from her hold, he bolted back through the trees, not sparing her another glance, praying she'd stay put. He couldn't save everyone, he couldn't do everything, but he could at least ensure her safety if she stayed on the cliff out of sight and away from the fight. Ducking past branches, Finn ran headlong down the path, whistling for Zap as loudly as he could. He had to find her, he had to get in the air. A boom sounded and the ground shuddered beneath his feet. More screams rose from the village and Finn quickened his pace, whistling again for his dragon. If he couldn't get in the air, he'd have to find a bow and try shooting them out of the air, or else be stuck on the ground with the rest of the village. I'm coming, I'm coming, I'm coming, he heard himself growling between clenched teeth. He whistled for Zap one last time, praying she could hear him and find him, before the path sloped down a steep hill that opened directly into the village. Not checking his speed, his boots slipped on the mud halfway down and he ducked into a slide rest of the way before charging through the thicket. A blast of heat hit his face as he ran between a row of burning houses. He shielded his face with an arm until he entered the chaos of the lower town. Thick black smoke belched out of the closest buildings. Fires licked up the walls of many homes. A woman held out a toddler by the arms at the topmost window, a man standing directly below to catch him. 3 wailing horses bolted from a side street. Another explosion of dragon fire rocked the ground and they shrieked. Men and women fled up and down the streets, many screaming and crying for help while the raiders flew overhead, overtaking Jutans and dragons alike. Dragons covered in armor dove, spraying fire and acid, shooting fireballs the size of boulders. One dragon snatched a man off the ground and carried him away, screaming and clutching the beast's foreleg. Finn allowed himself a mere second to think before he sprinted into the chaos. People knocked into him as they ran to and fro, calling names of loved ones or shouting for help. Zap would never be able to hear him over the noise and clashing of metal that began as a few raiders engaged in hand-to-hand combat with Jutan soldiers. Chaos. This was complete chaos. A blood-curdling scream made his ears ring and he looked in time to see a man go down with an arrow piercing his side. He heard the wing beats and felt the massive body surging for him, and without thinking, Finn dove to the side. Torrents of fire blazed right where he'd been standing seconds before. A monstrous nightmare landed amongst the flames and roared, furious that he'd escaped. Finn rolled to his feet and froze. The black-clad rider atop its back already had an arrow aimed at his chest. He couldn't see the man's face, which was obscured by a dark hood and mask covering his mouth and nose. But his eyes were narrowed, focus. Unyielding. Finn didn't see it, but he heard the twang. With a savage leap he dove to the side. A sharp white-hot pain tore through his bicep and he bit back a shout as he ducked into a roll, and flung himself past the corner of a house. A second arrow shot past his head and he ducked low. He could outrun them. Monstrous nightmares were big and not as agile as. Gasping, Finn came to a halt. It was a dead end. Growling lowly, the monstrous nightmare blocked the exit. Finn slowly turned and faced them, sizing them up. The rider atop the nightmare was thick-set and broad-shouldered. He could tell the man was smirking beneath the mask by the way the corners of his eyes crinkled. Smoke curled from the nightmare's nostrils and Finn tensed. He could feel blood dripping off his hand, but he didn't bother looking at the wound. "What do you prefer, lad?" the rider asked in a deep baritone voice as he pulled another arrow from the quiver slung across his shoulders. "Death by arrow or fire?" The nightmare stepped closer, his wingtips gouging into the earth. It growled low and guttural, yellow eyes hateful. A brief second of distraction had Finn wondering what they'd done to it to make it so angry. But he shoved the thought away, unwilling to be distracted. A brief glance up at the sky as a dragon hurtled past, but still, there was no sign of Zap. Finn glared at the rider. "I prefer to live a long and happy life myself." The rider chuckled. "Quick wit won't save you. I haven't got the time for." A spray of blood accompanied by the rider's scream interrupted the silence of the alley, and Finn leaped back at the sudden agonized sound. The man slumped in the saddle, an axe lodged in his spine. "Dead." "Finn." Thuggery appeared from the other side of the monstrous nightmare, who roared ferociously. "Take this." He threw a bow and sheath of arrows toward him, which fell at his feet in a heap. Finn only had eyes for the nightmare, who turned lethal eyes on him. He shoved the weapons away with his boot. "What are you doing?" Thuggery shouted. Steeling himself, Finn shouted, "Don't hurt the dragons." Then he charged. The nightmare swung its jaws toward him and he slid beneath them, barely missing the teeth by an inch. He grabbed one of the horns as he passed and kicked up, using the close quarters of the wall to pull himself up. Clinging to the dragon's horn, he shoved off the wall, the nightmare roaring in anger as he was yanked off balance. Directly above its head, Finn slammed a fist into the space between the dragon's horns. The nightmare gave a reeling cry of pain before collapsing to the ground with a thunderous boom that rattled Finn's bones. The ground shuddered and a plume of dust scattered until it lay still. Panting, Finn slid off the dragon. He briefly assessed Thuggery, who didn't look injured, but his dark eyes were wide in shock. Nightmares aren't ticklish. If you can do it without losing a hand, punch them in the soft spot between the horns. Thuggery nodded and grimaced at Finn's arm. "You should. If you even think about telling me to go to the healers," Finn hissed, snatching a knife out of the sheath hanging at Thuggery's side. "I'll shove you off the cliff." Thuggery gave a brief chuckle as Finn yanked off his coat and sliced off the sleeve of his shirt. The wound wasn't deep but continued to bleed even as they tied it off with the material. "It would have to do. We have to find my brother," Thuggery said, eyes lingering for a brief moment on the body of the man he'd killed. Realization dawned on Finn. Thuggery had killed a man to save him. Shaking out of the brief stupor, Finn retrieved the bow and arrows and jogged back into the fray with Thuggery. Now was not the time for reflection. "No. We need to set up a perimeter and get them out of the air. If I can find Zap, I'll watch out." They whipped around in time to see a change-wing opening its maw that dripped of hot acid at a group of fleeing villagers. Finn knocked an arrow, but before he could fire, a deadly nadder collided with the change-wing, sending them careening through the air. A girl with blonde hair grappled with the other rider as they careened for the ground. "Helga!" Finn shouted, already running, though there was nothing he could do as they disappeared over the cliff edge. He skidded to a halt, panting. She could handle herself, she knew what she was doing. She knew how to fight dragon riders. The Jotans did not. Finn looked in the sky, desperation beginning to claw up his throat. Half the village was burning and he still couldn't find Zap. Dozens of riders were in the sky though, and not only the raiding party, he realized. For that was Ivan on his Nada, Brutus shooting for a masked pair on a hideous ziply-back. And while they might not be in the air, multiple dragons were defending the homes of the Jotans. Spines shot in the air, colliding with arrows or blocking acid shots. Gronkle swallowed the boulders that were thrown and with growls, shot flaming fireballs right back at them. It wasn't perfect or organized, but they were fighting. The dragons were standing by their riders. Finn searched for Thuggery and found him sparring one of the riders, whose dragon had apparently been shot down. A hobblegrum lay sprawled in the street. Thuggery's training had served him well as a guard. Their swords flashed and he seemed to have a handle on the situation, as the man he fought did not seem to have the experience. He was merely fighting to survive. Satisfied, Finn sprinted for the nearest building. Kicking the door in, he located the stairs and took them 3 at a time. If he couldn't get in the air, then he had to make himself useful in other ways. Looping the bow and sheath of arrows around his neck, he shoved open the attic window and hauled himself onto the flat roof. He gritted his teeth against the pain in his arm as fresh blood oozed out of the wound. There he knelt and nocked an arrow, waiting for one of the raiders to get within close range. The first shot missed its mark. The second landed but merely lacerated a rider's leg. Finn heard him scream as they flew by, blood raining down on the rooftop. Whistling once again, Finn gazed briefly at the village, allowing himself a moment to simultaneously search for Zap and assess the damage. Most of the fires had been put out. A team of his trainees had their dragons hauling buckets from the ocean. A spark of pride filled him, but it dissipated quickly when he saw Thorin and his dragon giving chase to another raider. A second pair was on his tail and dread filled his chest. They needed backup. "Come on Zap, where are you?" Finn muttered, whistling once again. He prayed she wasn't hurt or worse. She had to have heard him, she had to. The rooftop shuddered as a dragon landed behind him. Finn whipped around, staring at the sight of a monstrous dragon he'd yet to ever come face to face with. His parents had always taught him and his sister that if they ever came across one to get away from it as fast as they could. Now he seriously regretted not learning a bit more about them. He had no idea what to do with a singed tail. The orange, flat-bellied dragon screeched at him, steaming tail poised to strike. Finn could barely dodge an arrow unscathed. How was he going to dodge a close-range fireball without falling off the roof and breaking his neck? He had very little hope that his meager bow and arrow would make a difference. "Who are you people?" Finn asked the rider, whose eyes glittered beneath the hood. "To get one of these bad boys wrapped around your finger." "A better question," the man said darkly. "Is why you can't just stay dead, Finn." He only had a moment to stare in confusion at the familiar voice before the singed tail rose into the air, flapping fiercely. Finn backed toward the edge of the roof he stood on, glancing back until his heels lined up with the edge. His heart pounded wildly in his chest at the drop, which was 20 feet to the ground. But past that was 100-foot drop to the ocean far below. For it was on this stretch of the island that the ground rose up higher above the rest, that the Jotans had built their homes along the outcropping of a massive cliff. And he was looking straight down it. And far, far above him he saw a familiar form take shape. Oh gods! Swallowing his fear, Finn faced the singed tail. There was nothing else he could do except hope this would work. Without Zap, without proper weapons, he couldn't possibly hope to survive an exchange with the orange dragon, one of the few species his father feared. The rider seemed to follow his train of thought. "Don't be a fool," he said, eyes widening a little as Finn edged back. A rush of adrenaline filled him as in a flash. The singed tail slung its tail in a wide arc and a thin bolt of fire shot toward him. Finn turned and leaped off the edge of the roof. The fireball rushed overhead, missing by a hair's breadth. He felt a short rush of satisfaction that the singed tail was fast, but he was faster still. But that thought quickly evaporated as he free fell past the cliff face and plunged headfirst down the cliff face. He wasn't his father. He rarely, if ever, free fell off his dragon voluntarily. The lack of control, the potential for not being caught in time by Zap and shattering all his bones against the water did not sound appealing in any sense. Finn was a daredevil, but he wasn't stupid. Thus, he fought to not panic as the wind rushed past his ears, the cold air forcing his eyes to stream. His stomach swooped and he felt himself gain speed, felt the panic rise in his chest as the water loomed, as he saw the crags of rock jutting up from the waves that were far more shallow than he predicted. Finn. Twisting, Finn saw the deadly nada, saw a flash of blonde, saw the wide brown eyes. A hand grabbed his collar and suddenly he collided with a hard mass of scales, nearly flipping over a wing. His vision darkened for a moment, but he could still feel the turbulence as they pulled out of the dive, still heard the wind whistling in his ears. Someone was shaking his shoulders and he blinked rapidly, squinting at the clouds rushing past. Helga's terrified expression loomed over him. "Oh, thank gods, I thought I broke your back." Finn groaned in sudden pain and clutched his middle. "Ow. Took you long enough. You stupid idiot." Helga screeched, shaking him. "I almost didn't get there in time." "But you did," Finn coughed, sitting up and yanking her into a hug. She went still for a second before hugging him back. "Thank you." Helga leaned back and Finn noticed a nasty burn on her collarbone. At his wince, rolled her eyes. "Stupid changeling." Finn carefully maneuvered so he was sitting behind her as her deadly nada turned back toward the village. The distant view of the attack brought a gasp from Finn's lungs. Plumes of black smoke rose into the sky. If there had been any neighboring islands close by, they'd probably see the smoke rising in the distance. But the Jatans really had no close neighbors. Perhaps another reason these people kept attacking them. Not only for their wealth, but also for their seclusion from the other tribes. "We've got to get back there. Hurry," Finn urged. "Finn, you don't understand," Helga said tensely. "You landed on top of Shade's spines, you nearly died, I don't think." "I'm fine, Helga, get me back to the village." She huffed but urged Shade to fly faster. "Where's Zap?" A pit of worry yawned in Finn's chest. "I don't know." Helga gave him a brief, concerned look but focused on the flight as they rose up toward the village. The Jatans seemed to be rallying their troops. Another spark of pride lit in his chest as he saw a few of them riding their dragons bareback, chasing the raiders off their island. Already Finn could see many of them fleeing. They flew over the expanse of the village, searching for the best place to land. A group of raiders were still hitting the upper town hard and Finn simultaneously saw a skirmish by the mill. "Put me down here," Finn shouted over the din. Helga gave him a disapproving frown but obeyed. Shade squawked indignantly as Finn dropped to the ground. "Be careful. Go," Finn shouted, waving at them to help the villagers. They took off in moments and Finn whirled toward the path that led to the mill. He'd lost his bow during the fall, so he yanked off the quiver and threw it at the feet of another young man who stood sentinel nearby with a bow and arrow ready. "Take those, you need them more than I do." He didn't stop for a response and hurtled through the trees. Shouts of dismay sounded ahead and he picked up his speed, his breath like shards of glass in his throat. When he cleared the trees and the mill opened up ahead, what he saw made his heart leap. Kiev stood at the front of a group of villagers, hands uplifted. A changeling stood at attention, teeth dripping with green acid as the rider atop his back poised an arrow at the retired chief's chest. At the front of the group, Genevieve struggled against the bonds of a man holding her back. The singed tail flapped overhead, tail steaming, ready to strike. Finn had no thought for himself. They didn't see him coming as they remained locked in a standstill. So as he hurtled into their midst, he took a flying leap just as the rider's fingers loosened on the bow, and he collided with the rider atop the changeling. The rider cried out in shock and anger as they collapsed in a heap, the people shouting and screaming. As he grappled with the rider who'd tried to kill Kiev, though he could barely think as the man tried to shove him off, he briefly hoped that the arrow hadn't hit Kiev or anyone else. "Genevieve!" The man growled angrily and shouted, "Fire!" The singed tail obeyed, shooting a bolt of fire right at the crowd. "No!" Finn screamed. The villagers dodged, the bolt exploded right before them. They screamed as they fell, but he watched in horror as the guard holding Genevieve lost his grip on her and she toppled into the river. She disappeared in the current and was swept away. Finn had studied the maps. There were rapids and a waterfall downstream. Suddenly, a sonic scream filled the air. The struggling rider beneath Finn's arms froze, his blue eyes widening imperceptibly. A purple plasma blast exploded on the singed tail side and it screeched. The saddle disintegrated and the rider grappled with the dragon's side, fighting for a handhold, but he dropped to the ground in a heap. The singed tail turned and flapped toward the sea as fast as it could, fleeing the night fury that circled the embankment. Finn had never been more happy to see his father and Toothless in his life as they hurtled after the orange dragon. The Jotans cheered. Realizing he only had seconds, Finn growled and scrambled out of the dirt. He locked eyes with the man and for a brief moment, time slowed. Those blue eyes seemed so familiar. But he didn't allow himself more than a heartbeat to stare before he whipped around and hurtled down the path of the river. The villagers dodged as he flew past and he tore past a man staring downriver. He was 10 feet away before he realized the man had been Kiev, staring after Genevieve and unable to help her. Finn quickened his pace. The river was fast, a rush of water that pooled and eddied around massive rocks. He could tell by the darkness that it was deep, rushing from far within the island toward the ocean. He'd known by studying maps that it ran around the perimeter of the island and curved back inward where it eventually cascaded into a huge waterfall that plunged over the far side of the island. Right off the very same cliff he'd leapt off of earlier. Rocks emerged in the river up ahead and the water began to shift in small waterfalls and canyons, froth forming at the edges of the water from the force of the current. Finn heard a scream up ahead and urged himself to go faster, even though his body screamed at him to stop. "Where are you? Where are you?" Desperately, Finn whistled for Zap. It took 2 times for him to whistle properly, his breath was so ragged. Then suddenly he saw a body grappling with a slick boulder before disappearing beneath the rapids again. Finn gasped and sped up, necessity urging him to catch up. He passed the place he'd just seen her and felt a flash of panic when he couldn't find her. Genevieve emerged downriver, hacking and fighting against the current. For a moment she spotted him and she nearly swallowed a mouthful of water trying to call his name. "Hold on!" Finn shouted, keeping pace with her. He nearly toppled in himself when he got too close to the edge. "Don't fight the current, you'll just wear yourself out." What Genevieve screamed when a wave shoved her under. He could see the boulders beneath the water and it was only a matter of time before she hit her head. If that happened, she'd probably flip beneath the surface and drown. Looking ahead, Finn saw the mist rising in the air from the waterfall. They were close, too close. Gritting his teeth, he found a piece of land jutting out above the river and put on a burst of speed. With a fierce leap, Finn jumped into the river. The sensation of sharp knives jabbed him from head to toe. He couldn't think or breathe, and it was all he could do to not inhale on instinct as the pull of the rapids jerked him to and fro beneath the water. He rammed into a rock and finally surfaced, gasping for air. He relaxed and let the current take him, twisting and turning in search of Genevieve. "Finn!" He whipped around and found her 20 feet ahead of him. He surged forward, using the speed of the current to catch up. "Come here." Genevieve's face was white and her lips were blue, but she fought the current to try to get to him. She reached out a hand and with a wild snatch, Finn grabbed her arm and yanked her to him. "I got you. I got you," he said, pulling her toward the side of the riverside. A wave of exhaustion hit him and he shook it off. "Swim to the edge." A sucking sensation yanked him under and Genevieve yelped as they submerged, the water carrying them down the rapid. Finn kept his arms tight around her waist, unwilling to let her go. Water shoved its way up his nose and into his mouth with the torrents of their thrashing. His feet hit the floor and he kicked up hard, forcing them to the surface. He shoved Genevieve above the surface first and came up hacking. With a surge of growing panic, he heard the crash of the waterfall not far behind. They kicked hard for the edge of the river, but the strength of the current pulled them back. "I'm not strong enough, Zap!" Finn shouted desperately, clutching Genevieve to his chest as sudden the water curved outward. A scream shattered from Genevieve as they suddenly fell. Finn clutched her to his chest as his stomach swooped into free fall and he curved her body around hers, ready to take the impact when they hit the water far below. Right as they plummeted, a familiar roar sounded in his ears. Instinctively he reached up just as a flash of blue caught his eye and with a painful slam, they stopped. Pain rippled through Finn's shoulder and he fought on a strangled scream as their combined weight, wet clothing and hanging above the terrifying drop hung from his arm socket. Genevieve yelped and clutched his waist, panting at the sudden stop in their fall. But he couldn't help the hitch in his voice when he looked up gratefully at Zap. "Baby girl, I have never been more happy to see," he gaped. Genevieve gasped. "Max." Indeed, that was Max staring down at them with a wide, toothy smile. His membranous dark blue wings flapped steadily even as his claws threatened to cut into Finn's arm. "Boy, am I glad to see you," Finn huffed a short, crazy laugh. The sound was so edged with panic he almost didn't recognize himself. "Put us down somewhere safe, you big galoot," Max obliged, gently turning them so he didn't twist Finn's arm off. They flew a safe distance